Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Neil. We've got apologies from Neil Bacon, who's the Chief Strategy and Transformation Officer, from Paul Johnson, the ICB's Chief Medical Officer, Matt Prosser, Chief Executive for Dorset Council, Andrew Rosser, Chief Finance Officer for SWAFS, Stephen Slough, the ICB's Chief Digital Information Officer, Kate Taylor, ICB Board Non-Executive Member, and Dan Worsley, Non-Executive Member. And hopefully, Matthew.
Can I add a message from Siobhan Harrington, which I'm not sure if it's reached you or not. Siobhan is on her way, but sends her apologies. She's detained at an urgent appointment, but will be here as soon as possible.
Thank you very much. That's really helpful, because no, that hadn't reached me. So thank you. And then can I also welcome, I don't know if that's who I can see on the screen, but can I welcome Professor Keith Falf? Is that you that I can see, Keith?
Sorry, yes, I was just being slow with my mic as well.
Welcome. Hi. So Keith is here as the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Bournemouth University. So he's Pro-Vice Chancellor for Education and Quality. So welcome to your first meeting.
Thanks very much.
Right. We've got various people that will be joining us throughout the meetings, but I'll let people introduce themselves when they get here to do the various parts of the agenda. So let's move on then. First of all, can I just check if there are any conflicts of interest, any declarations that people need to make? Lisa?
I think I've switched it on and off.
Yeah.
I'll get to I'll get used to this by the end of the day. It's the inward investment item on the first part of the agenda. I work with two of the organisations that are named in the recommendations, so Social Finance UK and Crowdfunder UK, my day job with my clients. So I'll just step back from that discussion. That's all right.
Thank you very much. I think it will be okay for you to participate in the discussion. If there's issues when we get to making decisions, then we'll think about it then. So thank you. Anything else? Right, let's move on then. So I hope everybody's had a good summer. It looks like it's well and truly over looking out the windows at the moment. It looks like we've arrived in autumn. But I hope everybody managed to get a break, either a short or a long one, and that everybody's refreshed and ready to go for the last half of the 24-25 year. And we started off knowing it was going to be difficult. We know it is difficult. So we need those energies and the reserve, the enthusiasm and the enjoyment to get us through the rest of the time. So I think the agenda that we've got before us today, we've got two items that are here for approval. One relates to the board assurance framework, and then the other one to the inward investment strategy that Lisa just referred to. We'll obviously take those in turn when we get there. For the rest of the meeting, we will be noting and being updated and getting assurance on various aspects of the ICB's work. So what I would like to do first is to start with the minutes of the last meeting. I just get myself organised. So that was on the 11th of July. Can I walk us through the pages that we have here? So page 1, which is just the attendees. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So we can take those as an accurate record of the last meeting. And then in relation to the action log, I think the items are either on today's agenda or have been completed with the exception of 24-112, which is going to be taken forward for a future report. I don't know, have we got any suggestions as to when we should expect that to come back? Tricia, any thoughts about when that should come back?
Sorry, just give me a minute. I'm still trying to get onto admin control. What report is it?
Where are we?
Okay.
David? Yeah.
So just because Tricia's been on leave, so missed the round of subcommittees. We in the last subcommittees we considered this alongside the feedback that we'd received from each of the committee members, or from committee members who submitted a response to the improvements into the ways of working. So we'll take it as one whole approach. And we did say that we would go back into the next round of subcommittees in October with developments and suggestions around some of this work. So we could probably bring an update back to the next board meeting.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you very much. And for those of you on screen, if you're just wondering what that screeching now noise is, it's we've got window cleaner doing the external windows. So hopefully it won't be too distracting. Okay, so that moves us on then to the board story. And it's tackling inequalities, and so I think I'm going to hand over.
So for me, when thinking about health inequalities, I'm thinking about the differences in people's health and their access to health, which can be variable depending on where people live. It's also about special characteristics such as it could be person's age, sex, religion, the fact that they have a disability could all again have an impact on how they access health. In terms of the geography of Dorset, of course, we're made up of a very rural, particularly in North Dorset, so from tiny villages and hamlets through to small market towns, but kind of some distance away from our major hospitals and that kind of thing, right through to our coastal communities, and Portland being kind of exceptional in the fact that there's kind of one road on and one road off. So the makeup, the geography of Dorset really does impact on health inequalities for our local population. And we have such rich data and insights into where the pockets of deprivation are, that can obviously help us in terms of understanding where we need to pay attention in terms of the way we work and the way that our colleagues work across the system.
Meetings were called by the people of Portland because they felt that they were not being listened to, and they were like almost like second-rate citizens. It was led by Paul Johnson. He represented the ICB, and there were various other people from across the ICS who were there as well, to listen to people, not to dictate anything, just to listen to them, to hear what they said. They were very vocal, and again, one of the things they were saying is they didn't feel they were being listened to, and that their services were being reduced, and there was fear that they could actually lose Portland Hospital, which they felt was absolutely critical for them on the island.
I mean, I had an elderly lady crying her eyes out. She got 3 buses over to Poundbury to this, I think it's a private clinic, check, I think it's called, to have this particular test. And it was a filthy day like this, but blowing a hoolie. And it was a while back now. And by the time she got home, it was about 5:30. She started off at about 9 o'clock, got home, and she was well into her 70s. And when she got back, there was a message on the machine from this place saying, could you come straight back because they'd forgotten to do something? And she said, no, I can't. Good God, no. She said, well, can you come back tomorrow? She did the whole trip again. And she said they didn't do anything different. She said, no idea why I went back there. And she tried to make a complaint about it, and other people have had. And you think, this isn't the way to treat people, is it? You know, especially the elderly people.
We had various other organisations across the ICS, but one of the key ones that we had was developing a relationship with the voluntary community sector on the island, which is thriving. There are various different groups that are really, really passionate and really good at supporting people on the island, and one of the key ones was Island Community Action. They were one of the key ones for us actually getting in and starting to build trust with people on the island as well, so that we could start listening to them and properly understanding what the issues were for people on Portland, and so that we could actually work as an integrated care system to actually see what we can do to improve services on the island. We feel there's been huge improvements in terms of the trust that we've built on the island, in terms of the relationships that we have with people and various different community groups on the island. And again, it comes down to the whole kind of thing that we're working together as a whole system to try and help and support people. And the community conversations that we did on the island went a long way for us to understand what people needed, not what people wanted, but what people needed on the island.
I must say, everybody I've talked to from the NHS has been so sympathetic, and they are on our side. That's what I think we get from it. You know, I don't feel we're battling sort of hitting a brick wall and battling against so much now, because I've met so many people now over the last, it's a couple of years now, I suppose, who seem to be really, understanding what we're at. And before, I don't suppose anybody really knew, so that's a really positive thing, isn't it, to come out of it.
So in terms of where we go next, so of course we've had some really in-depth conversations with people in the community in Portland. We've identified some key priority areas that we need to focus on. There have been some quick wins, if you like, in terms of the patient participation group, for example, at the practice on Portland is being kind of reinvigorated. And so there's a call out for new members and that kind of thing, including young people, which is fantastic. So also there's a focus on same day or urgent care and thinking about what that looks like for people on Portland. There's also a lot of work going on around developing a family hub. And there's been engagement and surveys with parents and families on the island to think about where that should be. So a lot of work now in progress with regards to Portland itself, and that will continue. But in terms of the approach that we've taken, thinking about the health inequalities, understanding the data and insights, having conversations with people and kind of co-producing what we need to focus on and then working together through that process, it is what we want to do next and what we want to do across Dorset.
We feel we've got a voice now, definitely. That is really important. Whereas I think we didn't before, and I would say it's definitely being worthwhile, there's no doubt about it. And we've just got to keep at it though, haven't we? And get those people right at the top to understand.
So we did a 9-day pop-up project in the centre of Boscombe. We had a number of aims with the project, and the key aim was to provide accessible healthcare and support in one location, effectively creating a one-stop shop to our local community. And we really wanted to target individuals that either wouldn't usually engage in normal healthcare services for different reasons, or who wouldn't engage in healthcare that was provided by students. And what we wanted to demonstrate was that actually using a student healthcare workforce can help take the strain off the NHS by providing basic healthcare advice and guidance, and then also working with other agencies such as Community Action Network to provide support advice to individuals so that they can access all of the health and care they needed in one place. We covered a wide range of areas, so we provided NHS health checks for those that were eligible, but then for those who weren't, we were providing blood pressure testing, BMI testing, and providing advice and signposting if needed to GPs and to other healthcare services. We provided musculoskeletal assessments, advice and guidance. We had dietetics and also podiatry, foot health checks, to name a few of the services going on. And then we also provided exercise classes for all different abilities, and also public health talks as well, so that people could learn more about health and how that they themselves can support their own health needs. So Health Sciences University actually is based within Boscombe and Folkestone, and one of our key strategic aims is to support our local community through healthcare and healthcare advice. Boscombe is a deprived area, and that we know that many individuals that live in and around Boscombe do have long-term health conditions and health and support needs. And so we really wanted to take our services out into the community. Rather than expecting the community to come to us, we wanted to go out to the community. Also, one of the barriers to our on-site services is that they all carry a fee. And again, that can make accessibility for many members of the local community not attainable. And therefore we wanted to do this pop-up event where everything was absolutely free, to take that barrier away for individuals as well. Feedback has been really positive. So everyone who was there was asked to complete a friends and family questionnaire, and also to provide feedback on their experiences. Overwhelmingly, everybody rated the service as good or excellent, they did, and found that the service was really useful at providing them with information and support that they needed.
I haven't put on my apologies, didn't put on my microphone. So hopefully you found that interesting. And I think what it brings up there is that two different approaches to how we work with communities who are amongst our most deprived within the Dorset community, and that there's no one simple answer that is going to fit all. And a lot of things there which tell us that we really need to listen to people and what it is that that community actually needs and would find useful. And it isn't going to be a cookie cutter approach that we will be able to apply across the board. It will be different solutions where we go. So what I'll do now is I'll just hand over to see if there's anything else that Anita would like to just add to that, and then we'll if there's any questions. If Jenny, if you would like us to take questions at this point, thank you.
Yes, please, that'd be really helpful. Anita, did you want to add anything?
Nothing particular to add, just to say that those two examples there in the video give us a sense of what can be achieved if we start doing differently, both in terms of how we really use engagement and insight from our communities, and how as a system we can work together with people contributing. That second example in terms of their corporate social responsibility, and a real feeling they wanted to contribute something as an organisation that provides services in the community, and how we can use that approach through our programmes to develop how we do our work in future, really drawing on all the efforts of our partners around the table. The paper that's presented here takes people through particularly the culture, leadership and governance approach, and a framework developed by the NHS Confederation to help leaders think about their role in this space and to consider what else they might need in this, what more could be done, and what support they would like with that. If you'd like, I could take you through more detail of that, but otherwise I'll tell you that people have read the paper.
So let's go for questions and comments. So Patricia, then Matthew, then Rhiannon.
Just trying to trick me now, aren't you? Because the Dorset Council one turns green and red when it's off. You're just trying to trick me, I know. I just wanted to say something about the agenda and why this is on, because we've been thinking about the fact that the board probably needs to shift a gear in terms of spending around 60% of its time talking about strategy and long-term vision and 40% of it on operational detail. And we've sort of got into talking about a lot of operational detail. So this paper is the first of a regular agenda item that will deep dive into one of the strategic priorities that is on the board assurance framework, so that you have an ability to test the assurance on whether those priorities are being delivered across the partnership, and get some of the evidence around that and the outcomes that are being achieved. And you'll see later on in the agenda, the integrated performance report is in the appendix, and the updates from that will come through the escalation reports. But I think we do need to just think through, as we go forward with that format, how we make sure that the executives and the NEDs who lead the committees, that we get more substance in the escalation reports to make sure we don't miss anything. But this is a first go at taking a deeper dive into one of our strategic objectives to be clear on whether we're doing all the right things to achieve the outcomes that we've set out.
Okay, thank you, Matthew.
Great, thank you. So first of all, I wanted to say thank you for this morning. I think this is amazing work, and there is so much to it, and it is exactly what, as an integrated care board and integrated care system, we should be doing. And what's being done here is it's a job that's never done, first of all. So it's not perfect. It will always be work in progress, but there's real engagement and listening, and also setting the climate of expectation for us all then to come to the table through the integrated care system. What I wanted to just comment on is the link between this and then the integrated neighbourhood team work that we, again, collectively are embarking on across the system, because this is fundamental to the success of the INT work. We need to take all of this and build on it, and that's what we are doing in terms of the programme of INT work. And out of this, you can see some real tangible changes in terms of the NHS coming to the table in a different way, but also working with the VCSE, working with local authority colleagues differently to support interventions like different clinics in Portland Hospital, like a different way of accessing primary care on Portland, like trialling different roles to support urgent care, like some of the lunch clubs and cooking skills that have all been supported in that area, like career conversations for young people on Portland. So things that will make a real difference. So I think, coming back, Patricia, to what you said and how the board works, I think in the months ahead, we need to understand how we're going to get the focus on the INT programme. And I think seeing it through the lens of the outcomes probably isn't enough, and we need to build into the performance report some scrutiny of that programme and what's happening. So I would welcome being able to do that with colleagues. And then just two other strategic links briefly are, there's a big link between the themes that come out of this and the architecture of place. So I think we need to think about that and how we can strengthen place, because some of the things will be very specific to neighbourhoods or streets, or sub areas within neighbourhoods, but there will be generic themes that need to be taken forwards in our two local authority places. And the third area I think we need to consider strategically is the opportunity we've got in Dorset with DICE, where we've got a data system here that's probably, Patricia, one of 4 or 5 in the country in terms of systems where we've got data, and we really need to leverage the advantage of that data, because it gives us a great resource to designing and implementing interventions which can make a difference to inequalities.
Yeah, and it's not just that, it's got fact that we've got data is the insights part of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's what it's all about, that we need to leverage, isn't
Yeah.
it? So thank you. Rhiannon.
Try again. Yes, thank you. It's a really important item for the ICB to be having as a regular thing that is focused on. I guess for me, I absolutely heard the focus around equity of access, but I think what I would like to hear more going forward would be about that contribution to the wider determinants and the impact on those, let's say, wider ranging elements. I think even in the clip, what came through to me was some of the challenges around transport, for example. So how the partners are all working together to really sort of tackle and, you know, respond to what they're hearing. And I suppose getting some assurance that the very seldom heard people are really getting the focus on meeting their needs across a diverse spectrum. I think the other bit for me, just to get some specific assurance, you know, great that the students were being given the opportunity to support the needs of the community health needs. I guess I also wanted assurance that the students were getting some massive benefit from their opportunities to contribute, which I'm sure they are, but it didn't necessarily come through. I suppose just a final piece of assurance that I was would be good to hear. Absolutely great initiatives, but I also want us to be assured that the initiatives are not just a kind of one-stop shop that just happens once, because we don't want to raise expectations for people in the communities and then, you know, next week the thing's not there that they found really beneficial. So I think it may not be assurance today, but I think the board needs to be taking assurance on those elements as well. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'll take Debbie and then I'll come back to you both.
Thank you. Just share the comments that others have made around. I thought that was really, really good and really excellent to see. But I suppose, as all of these things, and I guess that's what they're supposed to do, it actually starts off at making you ask more questions than actually presents to you. I think sort of building on what Matthew and Rhiannon have both said, really, I think I sort of wanted to know how are we going to continue to get oversight and assurance as a board that actually we are not just listening to our population in Portland, but actually taking the next steps to actually make the real difference. So for example, I sat there and thought, you know, the elderly lady that had to get 3 buses, well, we're now listening, but has that actually changed? And she's still having to get 3 buses today. And so sort of where is that oversight going to be, so that we get assurance as a board that actually we're not only listening, but we're then moving forward at pace with regards to making the difference. And it might be that comes through the integrated neighbourhood team work that you were suggesting, Matthew, that sort of takes us into the progress that's being made sort of going forwards on that. So that's where I was at. Really, really good, but just want to know sort of where we get our assurance from going forwards that actually we're listening and then making a difference.
So I think the context of all of those questions is great, but even better if. So do you want to come back to?
I'll come back in quickly, and then I think, you know, Anita, who lives and breathes this every day, I think will be well placed to tackle some of the very specific questions that have been addressed. I think for me, there's a couple of things, which is this is absolutely a journey. We're listening. We've got some evidence that we're improving access, even if it's in pockets. But actually, for me, we've not completed the journey until actually what we're seeing is improvement in outcomes and equity of outcomes. And so the access is first step, getting people first through the door, getting people to actually have the treatment and the medical supervision or clinical supervision that they need. Improving the wider determinants, all of those are the first things. And then we need to see the outcomes. And some of those outcome changes will come quite quickly. Some we won't see for a number of years. And I think it's how do we, as a board, ensure that we do have that strategic oversight, that is a journey that we can see our system taking, and that we're making progress on that. Because, I'm sorry, I'm going to steal your thunder here, Anita, so apologies if I do, but Anita sort of talks about the head, hand, hearts, or head, heart, hands. And I think everybody knows that these are the right things to do. How we get that into what people live and breathe, and every decision we make has a question in it about, and have we thought about the health inequalities aspect of this? I think isn't completely there, particularly when it's challenging for people because they have to change what they've always done. And then the third part of that is the doing. And actually we see that that isn't just being talked about, actually we see the evidence that it's being done. And we've clearly got some really good examples. Have we got that universally? I don't think we do, but it's a journey. And so I think for this group, it's having that strategic oversight of saying, actually, we're assured that that journey is happening, and what can we do to actually make it happen quicker, I think would be my thoughts.
Okay, so Patricia, then John. Oh, and Nick.
I think that's fundamental, actually, Alison. And there are a couple of things that come to mind. One is we've got the population health training for colleagues at 2 different levels, and Paul and I have been talking about how do we broaden that model with Dawn, so it's not just giving people the skills around population health management. There's an OD change management element to it, and how do we then determine right across our health and care system which colleagues need the basic training, who needs something that's more in-depth. And that's really critical as a foundation, because it starts people giving them the skills to understand population health, but it also then gives them the skills to start to understand why and how it's relevant to their role. We've got in November, Dawn and I and Paul and Alison and Anita have been working on health inequalities and prevention conference that we're hoping to run the first week in November. That's for colleagues right across the system. One, to introduce them to some national work that's been done in that space, not just around supporting communities to thrive, but also what's then the leadership ask from everybody to make that happen. And then later on in the afternoon, we're going to do some workshop style groups to help people start to think through some of the themes and how they then apply them to their everyday work. Because what we want as the output from that is that we start to embed health inequalities, as Alison says, as a golden thread into everything that we do. So we need to start to think through how we do that, how we change the way that we report, how we change the way that we ask people to do proposals, because then they are thinking about service delivery in that context. And then Alison, Matthew's point again around strengthening place is absolutely critical. And we've talked about that at the board before. How do we get our place leadership teams up and running properly? How do we use the work that we've done with PwC around what some of the priorities at place should be? And how does that work then again have health inequalities woven through as a golden thread? So we really are supporting the development of communities to thrive, but in that context of levelling up in its broadest and deepest sense.
Okay, can we pick some of this up when we go on to the next agenda item, which is the tackling inequalities and outcomes, experience and access. But I'm going to go to John and then Nick, and then I'm going to suggest that we move on to that. Oh, you've got a green light. A flashing green light even.
No, we're there. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. You'll be not surprised to hear that we're 1000% behind this work and up to rivals in all sorts of bits of it. The three very brief things I wanted to mention. One is I think there's an opportunity here to look at the meta processes about how we're delivering this, and about where the locus of control and management and where oversight can be, dare I say, overbearing, and kind of limit what people can do. And I think there's a bit of kind of watching how we do that that's coming through very strongly, which is really positive. How do we work to the best advantage for all the people who are involved in these networks and our system working? And it's a real sharp end experience here. So how much can the community be able to meet its own needs through better information and better understanding first? Secondly, how do we find ways to make our service delivery and design more responsive to the gaps and to the delivery opportunities in those different spaces and places? So there's some really interesting stuff about how we negotiate that and how we understand those methods around negotiating those activities. Meeting during the day during 9 to 5 doesn't cut it, for instance, for some of this stuff, just to make an obvious point. The second thing that I think is really important here is that there seems to be a little bit of tension between what is considered to be a kind of health part of the health or the inequalities agenda and what is community development work in this space. And I think there clearly needs different resource and different approaches in that. And I think that we need, perhaps with the strengthening of the place agenda, to look at the community development as almost a separate part of this agenda. So that we're clear that we don't entangle ourselves over much in waiting for the wider determinants to be done within a health context, that we actually look at the community as tackling those things and coming alongside in that way. And I think we have had some struggles in terms of how we've understood these priorities and what the community then is being asked for in the context of health and what it's being asked for in terms of the context of the wider determinants. Transport is a really good issue, and it brings me to my final point, which is sometimes there's some unintended consequences that I think we need to just be a little bit mindful of in this. At the moment, a lot of the community transport services in Dorset, which are there to deal with and to support people with addressing the kind of inequality of access, are now focused so much on health, there isn't any opportunity to get community transport for other services. So we're seeing people becoming socially isolated because they have all the local community car schemes are being used to get people to and fro to medical appointments. Now that's setting up, from my point of view, an issue in the longer term and in the immediate term. So I think that kind of awareness of how the health agenda is impacting on existing community needs is a really important part of this journey. And again, goes back to my first point about looking at the meta level of how we structure these conversations and the needs beyond a health inequality piece into the other things that are needed in our communities.
Really helpful points, John. And again, I think we should come back to that when we get to the next paper. Nick.
Actually,
yes, it's on.
It's on. It is
yeah.
On. I'm probably going to echo John a bit, actually. So obviously, Dorset Council is very well aware of the inequalities and the deprivation around Weymouth and Portland. Depending on how you look at it, lots of areas of that the conurbation, if you want to call it, are either top or bottom. Yeah, neither is a good thing of many indices: social deprivation, poverty, educational achievement, that sort of thing. So, and you could argue that not a lot has changed in 30 years. A lot of it stems from the loss of the Navy base, and there has not been any investment in any meaningful sense in that area. And the new administration of Dorset Council is tackling that. We've got announcements coming up about Weymouth very soon, in terms of regeneration and in terms of job opportunities and educational changes. And it was just an observation on the 3 buses. And as John's just mentioned transport, she was quite lucky that she could actually catch a bus. Weymouth, Portland, Weymouth and Dorchester is probably the best served area in Dorset Council for buses. If you're in Gillingham or North Dorset, as was mentioned in the report, you got no chance. And we're obviously trying to address that as well through the LTP, and maybe opportunities through devolution. So watch this space.
Okay, again, really important point. So, Alice, then, I think you are doing the next paper. So yes. Can I ask you to move directly onto that? And
yes,
perhaps if there's anything residual that you wanted to cover it whilst you're introducing the paper.
I mean, I think these are all things, and I think they actually feed really nicely into what the paper is going to talk about, because this is really looking at how we assure ourselves that we are doing the things that we need to do. It is not about the operational specifics. I think that is that's a different paper. This is really about what our strategic role is and how we assure ourselves that we are doing those things that we need to do. I think all of these comments are really, really helpful, because they do remind us about the breadth of us, our roles as a system and our expertise as a system, where we all need to come together to address these issues. I think what I'll do at this point is I'll hand over to Anita, and because I suspect any comments that have come up can probably be addressed as Anita takes us through the paper, because I think many of those topics are covered, even if not fully within it. Thank you, Anita. Thanks very much. I'm not going to go through all the detail in the paper, and I will hopefully you've had a look through it. The particular focus of this paper is to highlight to the board, using the Energy Confederation framework, give the board an opportunity to think through the role of the board in this culture, leadership and governance role in particular, using this really helpful tool that's been produced nationally. The paper takes colleagues through a little bit of background on our work in Dorset on health inequalities, recognising that we take a system approach in that. So we have a health inequalities group which brings together system partners to design our approach. The diagram in the paper, which we affectionately call our pink blob diagram, I might have to come up with a better title for that, shows all the components of work that we think as a bunch of partners we need to work on separately and together to really address both the causal factors of health inequalities, the individual and the system causes, and the effects of those. So very much thinking about what addresses the causes, what addresses the indirect causes, and what addresses the outcomes of that. So working system to unpick that and put it back together. And that picks up the examples that we had in the video, which is a snippet, a pinch of the work that our comms and engagement team have done to draw together community insight, and then to make it available to us all to use through an insight bank, so we can draw on. We've asked people about something, we can go back and review. What did people say about that? We've got any insight, so we don't fatigue people with constantly asking the same questions. So growing that in our Strong Communities programme helps us to have some insight to use to think about community voice in everything that we do. And there are a number of other streams around data, around variation exit services, but all of those thinking about what's caused this to happen, how can we take that together, who's best placed to take it forward, how can we support. This particular paper is about the culture, leadership and governance role focused on the needs of the board. I referenced in the appendix 3 other elements that the Confederation covers that colleagues may want to look at afterwards, but this one's particularly about the board. And what it does is bring together some key questions that both non-executives and system partners might want to consider when reflecting on some of the questions actually that come up here today. Are we really making sure we've got the right governance in place? Are we really making sure we've got the right leadership approach? Are we taking every opportunity to embed this in our culture, in the way we do things around here, and ask some prompt questions to challenge us to think about those? So it covers a number of, I mean, probably you all can hear me, my voice is increasingly going this morning, but hopefully the microphone's helping. So it takes us through a number of key areas on culture, leadership and governance to challenge ourselves to think about. I'm just going to skim through to those now. So things like, how do our governance structures explicitly address health inequalities, and how can we enhance their effectiveness? I've put some information in there about what we currently have in place in terms of ICB committees, such as Prevention, Equity and Outcomes Committee, but challenges to think about. We've got that committee and that's absolutely fabulous, and we're growing what we deliver to that committee and how we can make sure we support that committee in its oversight role. But what about our other committees? How do they think about variation in access, experience and outcomes? Is there anything more that we think about to support those committees in their role? How's that all brought together? Very much the questions that I was very pleased to hear coming out here, because that's very much a focus in the state of maturity in our system that the toolkit gives opportunity to focus on. It also asks questions about, do we give equal attention to health inequalities, to variation in outcomes, as we do to other priorities like finance and operational performance? Have we got the right measures and metrics in place? Are we really scrutinising this? Some prompts in there to help us consider that too. And are we thinking, really drilling down into our populations that have poor outcomes? Are we thinking about diverse communities? And are we monitoring that specifically through our plans and programmes? Are we embedding it in all of our decision-making processes? And can we evidence that? We know on board front sheets, for example, we always have a question about quality impact and about health inequalities, and you see we've dutifully filled those in here today. But are we always as good as the board would expect us to be in doing that, or considering the right things? Does the board have the right tools and resources available to you to understand what good looks like? Can we provide more in that space? What else would you like to do? And there are a number of prompts again to help colleagues consider that. And then, so that's the kind of core questions for non-executives and boards. There are also some questions we've included here in this leadership governance space around questions for system partners. And that's around how we make sure the information is available to all of our partners in terms of what we hold. And actually, for me, I would add to that in terms of as part of a system partnership, I want sharing as much as we can the information and insight we have. So the first one is, do we have a clear understanding of the health and care inequalities in our system? When I say health and care inequalities, we look at often access to healthcare services, but picking up on John's point, we're very much talking about outcomes, or people getting fair outcomes from our services. And that means the interventions aren't necessarily just about what health services can do, but how we operate in the system to generate those fair outcomes. That's a question about, are we contributing to building a culture that acknowledges and addresses health inequalities? And Patricia touched upon this in terms of that workforce development piece. So have we got the knowledge, skills, competence, confidence, and ability and permission to embed this into everybody's roles? Have we got the right supporting mechanisms to enable that? Do people know how to do it? Have we got permission? There's some prompt questions around that. But really, are we shifting our culture and our practice and everything that we do and thinking about addressing variation and unfair outcomes? Are we ensuring then that our day-to-day work aligns with our system goals? So we may have papers like this and work programs that many people contribute to, but in people's day-to-day role and those one-off interactions, whether that's with a patient, whether it's with a customer, whether it's with a colleague, in our one-to-one everyday interactions, we're building that in. It's just how we do things around here. And do we understand the challenges that we're facing? I know we're focusing on those. Are we able to raise issues in the right places? Propose solutions, stress challenges, and then finally, what else can we do? And from the board perspective, what else would the board like us to do as people working on health inequalities to take away and to think about working on? I recognise that in this meeting today, you may not have come with a whole scroll of things that you want to do, but as we develop this programme with our partners, we'd very much welcome insight from the board and what you would like us to build further and what approaches you'd like us to take in supporting the board in its role around governance, leadership and culture, addressing health inequalities. That's a very quick canter through the content of the paper. I haven't gone into detail, but hopefully gives you a flavour of what's in there and the considerations based on NHS Confederation Toolkit that help us, help lead us to drill down into what we might be able to do and strengthen, endorse them. Can I just very quickly come back in there, Jenny? And I think one of the, we've already heard that one of the tools we have in our toolkit is DICE. And the amazing detail that has within it, and is almost sort of growing day by day. And I think that's, for me, and I apologise because I'm putting a clinician health hat on with this when I'm sort of talking about this, but recognise that it is a much broader issue. Is that we're in danger sometimes, I think, in Dorset, that we look okay. So when we compare ourselves with national averages or with regional averages, we look okay. But I think the devil is in the detail of that, because the average hides the problems. And I think what we have to get much better at, and that's a royal we, is actually sort of saying, yeah, but what's hidden by that average? And I think people are beginning to ask those questions. I mean, I can speak personally. We've now got public health representation in our mortality surveillance group, and that has been spectacularly helpful in starting to just uncover some of these things where the average looks fine and where we could be reassured by that. But I think, as a board, we know that reassurance isn't good enough. We actually want the assurance that sits behind that. And so for me, it was just really to say that's one of the things that I'm sort of really keen in, is picking up your point, John, which is we need to get into those things where average is disguising things that we really need to tackle. Thank you.
I agree with that, Alison, and I also think that in the NHS, we sort of think average is okay, and it's not. And when I was a hospital chief exec, I used to say to new staff that were inducted, if you went and registered with a new GP and he said, "Sophie, Mrs. Miller, you'll be pleased to know that I'm mediocre," would you actually stay there? No, you wouldn't. So there's something about us not settling for being in the pack, actually, and wanting to be up here around performance. And there were a few things that came to my mind, actually, as I was rereading those prompt questions from Anita, in that whether we need to think about, and we've got a board development session coming up in October, and we've got part of the day we're looking at digital boards, but we haven't really crafted the rest of the agenda. And given that there is an intrinsic link between the two purposes around health inequalities and social and economic development, whether we want to spend the afternoon session thinking through as a board how we connect those two things, and what does the board, how does the board need to be in order to lead that agenda and get the assurance that it needs that's sat underneath it, particularly in the context of the Secretary of State's comments this week around the health service needs to be the best that it can around variation of outcomes, and actually work with partners on the wider determinants but not be the deliverer of them. And how do we as anchor institutions in the health service do everything we can to make sure we're maximising our ability to contribute to that agenda? And, you know, in the Journal this week, there was an article about, for example, about North Bristol making a decision to set a target around the recruitment of its staff and a percentage coming from deprived communities. And do we want to think about doing things like that? So I think maybe that's a point for consideration about whether we want to use that session in October to really have that deeper conversation about board leadership in this space, and where do we see that positioning itself.
That's interesting, because that example is in the Southwest as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
That just gave, so there's something else to think about. But there are quite a few hands, and I'm going to ask, when you're coming in with your contributions, if you could actually think back to the discussion that we just had, that was prompted by the video, the comments that have come through, and our role as a board, particularly in terms of getting assurance. And I'm particularly interested in the toolkit that you've put in the paper, Anita. I'm assuming everybody's read the paper, so you're not just going off the summary that Anita gave us, but the toolkit that you've put in there, whether or not the responses in there are the right things, because we might actually want to direct for other things to go into there or to be changed to make sure that we can have that assurance. So the thing that I'm struck on was the contribution that John made around the transport, because we can think we're solving a problem and actually we're making a problem worse. And I spoke to somebody 2 weeks ago who actually said that very thing, that they were unable to get to somewhere because transport now is only for urgent hospital appointments, so they weren't able to do anything else. And so we may well be contributing to further inequities. So if we can just think then about what data do we need, because the data that you've got down here doesn't seem to include the BCS sector. And so we just need to think about how do we make sure that we're getting that information and data coming through, because I don't think it's naturally part of DICE. So if I can just ask everybody to think about that when you're coming in with your contributions.
I think that's right, Jenny. And I think the other point is that whilst we have an equality impact assessment and there's been lots of training development in that space, I still don't think we fully understand health inequalities in the right level of detail across our system to be able to do that properly. And so I think we need to think a lot about that as well, because it's okay having the box ticked when a proposal comes to the board or the senior leadership team, but if what sits behind that is a lack of knowledge about the picture across Dorset, then we're not getting real assurances.
Yeah, so I am stuck on the understanding the problem on this bit, and I would like us to get that right if we could, because I think if we don't understand the problem, we're not going to solve the right issues.
And the other thing that's come forward this week is that the government have looked at the new hospitals programmes that have been approved, and they're now saying that they've been approved, many of them based on cost, as opposed to, and as a consequence, we are increasing inequalities by denying people local access to service. So I think there is a piece for us to do as well around how a new hospitals programme works to make sure that that is not the case and we're not creating more problems rather than solving them.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got John, Lisa, Cecilia and Matthew in that order.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up that point about the average disguising the sort of deficiencies and problems that we have in our communities. When the cost of living crisis was being mapped by Dorset Council's phenomenal business intelligence team, and we were talking to the DICE team about how they could also respond in a kind of similar way, we were looking at the disproportionate impact on communities that weren't previously seen as being quote unquote deprived. And so we've seen fixed income older adults living in high worth properties who were starving. And so we were able to put in interventions into those communities because we could dive into it at that hyper local level. And as a result of that, the deprivation picture looked less like 3 spots on the map and more like a plum pudding. And I think it's that kind of challenge that we have, and the opportunity, because the DICE was able to produce some absolutely amazing, I think they're called centroids or something like that, where you can dive into the subsets of the wards and the communities in much more detail and see where actually you could start to deploy the services that are needed at that much more granular level. And I think that's a huge thing to kind of be woven into this, and I know it is woven into the PHM approaches as well. So just a reflection that that quality comes through detail as well as aggregation.
Okay, thank you, Lisa.
It's great to have a committee that oversees health inequalities, but the risk with that is that the other committees abdicate. And it doesn't become that golden thread running through all our discussions. And your question, Anita, around what can the other committees do really resonated with me. And I think I've read somewhere, and I don't know where, that we need to make sure that when we talk about health inequalities, we proactively make sure that our staff are not suffering from the impact of health inequalities. Because if we can't get it right with our own people, then how on earth are we going to get it right outside? So I think it's really just something to think about for certainly for people engagement and culture committee is, are our own staff okay, and what can we do to support our own staff to make sure that they don't end up suffering as a result of health inequalities? And it's easy to think, well, they won't, will they, because they're in a health environment, but that's a big assumption. For example, there will be staff who can't afford private dental care whose kids are not getting dental care at all. So there's lots of stuff we have to do internally as well. And Dawn, it's just a note to us really to make sure that we think about that and make that thread run through our committee as well.
Yes, and through the ICP, I think I noticed that's in the toolkit as well. I think one of the I mean, I support what John was saying earlier about trying to do more in terms of activating local communities to actually build on this. I mean, when we're looking at scaling something up, the risk is that we think that we're going to do it all and we're going to, you know, do this one, then this one, then this one. How do we activate the local communities to do that? And we've had a lot of discussions in the ICP about social mobility, about housing. And I think the connection there is also the fact that our local ward councillors, for example, have an awful lot of information about their local areas. How many of them understand what's in DICE, how to use DICE? How many understand the language of social mobility or health inequality? I mean, that's a difficult language for the layperson to comprehend. How do we actually... The example's really good because they actually say what we mean by health inequality and equality of access. I think doing more of that and working with our local councils will actually start to address that neighbourhood approach as well. Because, you know, the ward council is almost like the GP from the sort of the non-health side of things. It's a person who actually knows their community exceptionally well, who knows where the voluntary services are and how to press on them. But they probably don't know about DICE as much as they should do, or how to access that data and possibly even use it in their own work. So it's another piece that might help with that scale up that we're talking about trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew.
Great, thank you. So at the risk of sounding like Oliver Twist and always wanting more, this is great work, but taking your steer, Jenny, about the toolkit. So my reflection is we're quite strong and making very good progress around domain 1, around the culture, leadership and governance. I think that's reflected in the paper, starting to understand the problem, and we get less strong as we go through. So, and I think there is a risk that because the subject matter is so broad, that we inadvertently perpetuate silo working and duplication in this space. So, Patricia, I really welcome your comments and suggested approach. The way it would work for me, I think this is only a small part of the answer, but I think we would really benefit from putting together a picture within our system about how we're sort of doing domain 3 in terms of delivering this. And so that would help position the INT work, but also all the other work that we're doing in this area. And then I think that would give us the basis to challenge ourselves about whether those programmes are going far enough, fast enough, where the overlaps are. And then the other thing I think we could do with doing, which Patricia, I'm sure is in your mind from what you've said, is just reflecting on the health mission board that is being set up at government level. And I think that's got 4 objectives, and there's a big link between this topic and those 4 objectives. So how are we doing those within our integrated care system in the broader sense? Because some of them will be led by local authority, some of them will be led by health, but the ICS and ICB is probably the agency that should have the overview, which doesn't mean we're doing everything, but it's that place where we see the whole.
Okay, thank you. I've got Nick and then Dawn.
Yeah, very briefly. Sorry, I wasn't going to speak, but since John and Cecilia mentioned data, so I think I'm the only ward member in the room. So I am an elected councillor for a ward in Dorset Council. We as Dorset councillors, we do get access to the dashboard, and it's actually personalised to our own wards. So we definitely know where the areas of deprivation are, even if we didn't beforehand, and pretty sure most of us do. I think if you spoke to any Dorset councillor, they would say they don't have large areas of deprivation, but they could show somebody or some streets that are deprived. But that data is out there. And I also have to confess ignorance about the other thing that Cecilia mentioned, DIAS, wherever that is. I have no idea what that is.
Impact service.
Okay. Maybe I could get some briefing.
Yes. Yeah, let's do that.
People let you have a demonstration.
Yeah, let's do that. Dawn.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And thanks, Anita and Alison. I want to just follow on from Matthew's point about the delivery and how we get stronger in the delivery, and draw the board's attention to the delivery of this and the report that we have later on the agenda about our equity, diversity and inclusion progress for our people, our workforce across our system. Unless we can demonstrate we are getting this right for our staff, then we are not providing the foundations for our people to be able to focus on health equity. And so there's something about the board understanding our role as in leadership of this agenda. And when we come to the next report, I encourage people to take this thinking and apply it to that report.
Okay, so did you want to come back in?
I just want it's I suppose it's one caveat. It's another caveat, which is it comes back to that scalability point that was made. There is a lot of evidence now beginning to emerge that people get very disappointed when you've had a pilot that has shown absolutely fantastic, amazing results, and then when you try to scale it, it falls flat in its face, because of course the pilot is likely to have been conducted by somebody who is an enthusiast and who will put all of their energy behind making it work. And so that, for me, we need to be careful about saying we're just going to scale things. We actually are going to have to do things individually or we'll get it wrong. Not individually as in, well, it may be individually per person, but each area will have its own challenges and will have its own slightly different needs. There may be the usual 80% of it's common and 20% of it's special. But I think if we did try and say this is the offer, we can scale it, we've shown that it's is going to work, I think we might find ourselves in trouble a bit further down the line, because the evidence says it won't, or increasing evidence says it won't.
And then I'm going to wrap up.
So I was just thinking about next steps actually, and I think that Matthew's point's a really good one around maybe doing some work with you and Kate and the transformation team around doing that sort of mapping exercise of all the work that's going on and make sure we have got health inequalities weave through it. But actually what I'm more thinking about is the medium to longer term, and doing some work initially at board development in October would be great as in terms of strengthening our approach, because when the Department of Health finished the 10-year plan in the spring, which then moves into budget setting for March, that plan is going to be a health improvement plan, of which the NHS will have a small part, but it's more focused on the wider health improvement of the nation. And I think we might want to revisit at that point whether we've set the direction in terms of supporting the delivery of that ambition from DHSC. So I think there's something about us just thinking about those two stages as we start to launch into the new financial year.
Okay, thank you, Patricia. That's really helpful. I'm going to add some other bits that I think I've heard in terms of sum up. If you think that it's pushing us too far or it's not doable, then let me know. But I think there was a question around language and the language that we use to make sure that everybody understands that came through from Cecilia. So I think it's a really important point for you to take forward as part of that. I heard what you just said, Alison, about the scaling up responses. But I think the point that Debbie made at the beginning was around sustainability, that if we've provided a solution, is that a solution that is ongoing? I didn't take the sense that let's scale it up to everybody, but let's make sure that what we're doing is sustainable. And so I think that sustainability is a really big part to be thinking about as we move forward. There was also the stuff about, I agree with Matthew about domain 3, but I think it might help to also include domain 2 to make sure that we really have got the right understanding. So if that picture can be painted across both, I think that would be helpful. And then finally, sorry, two more things. There was the health inequalities being a real central component to every decision that we make. And so I guess, Dawn, that's when you're talking about when we pick up the later piece. Let's come back to that, because I think we need to think about how we do that. And then finally, the use of DICE, because I think it was Matthew that talked earlier about leveraging insights. It's something that's come up quite a bit in our discussion. I think it might be helpful if we can have, David, whilst Patricia's out of the room, a presentation of DICE to the board, where we can actually see it in use and see what it's doing, so that we can try and maximise that. But then also think about how do we build on that so that we really are getting into the insights and what we're responding to. So if I can ask for those to be added to what Patricia's just agreed, and Matthew.
Very briefly, so Jenny, that's a great summary, and just the one comment I'd like to make is about this thing about sort of difference versus consistency and the scalability issue. So I think I get that, and I think that's right, but I think somehow we need to change the construct that we've got here, because if we're to work with local communities in a different way, the job is never done. It's an ongoing conversation, ongoing process. And so it's not about doing something that's perfect, waiting till it's perfect, doing it, stopping and moving on. And therefore there is something around, if you get the conversation right, it sort of doesn't matter if what you begin with isn't quite perfect, because you will build on that. And so I think there is something for us in this, in our system, I'd say this is across the NHS, about pace, because we haven't got the time to perfectly engage. We've got to get this programme moving with good pace across our system.
Yeah. And so the integrated neighbourhood teams is probably part of that, isn't it? But also the other part of that is the point that John made earlier, which is this is not about us doing things to people. This is about us helping them to do things for themselves. And that if we can do that, really engineer that in, that might increase the pace actually, because it's then not just drawing on our resources. We can kind of move that resource to other things.
That's really what Place is all about. Local authority colleagues leading that. That's what it's about.
Yeah. Okay. Is that helpful? Have you got everything you need, Anita and Alison? Great. All right. So let's move on then to the next agenda item, which is the board assurance framework. And are you going to be doing that,
Yes,
Are you
I'm just
in the
going to.
absence of-
I'm sponsoring this item, so
Yeah, thank you.
I'll just give a couple of sentences and pass to Leanne, who's joined us for this item. Hi, Leanne. So, colleagues, board members, you'll be aware and remember that this BAT has been through a significant cycle of development following our previous discussions. Having launched it in earnest a couple of meetings ago, we've had some really good feedback and some check and challenge, and it's been on that cycle of development. It's been through the recent round of subcommittees. And you'll see some of that in the escalation reports. And the version that's here is the one that went into those subcommittees. So there has been conversations and suggestions for further development coming out of the subcommittees, which will be reflected in the next iteration. Leanne's joined us because Leanne's doing some fabulous work leading this. It is a bit of a monster piece of work, particularly getting it going. Once these things are up and running, they tend to be very good and very smooth and very effective, but starting from zero is a tough ask. So thanks to Leanne for that. Leanne will take us quickly through some highlights and then any sort of questions we want the board to consider. So if I pass to Leanne at that point.
Hi, Leanne. And is that a pod behind you?
I apologise in advance. I
Do not apologise.
My background will not change. So yes, it's my French bulldog in the background.
Oh, it's a French bulldog. Lovely.
Yeah, currently licking his paws. So apologies if you pick that up in the sound.
No, we can't hear him. Go ahead.
Okay, good, thanks. So there are two key elements to the BAF report today. So it's the strategic risks themselves, and then the review of the regulatory domain risk appetite. So if I just start with the strategic risk first, the report summarises the BAF as at the 7th of August. There are now 8 strategic risks with the inclusion of the social mobility risk, which has been added recently. There are 3 risks currently sat outside of tolerance that all have mitigating actions in place to bring them back within the appropriate level of tolerance, which are risk 4, the health inequalities risk 5, productivity, financial performance and value, and risk 8, social mobility. So all mitigating actions are being tracked and reported on through those risks. And once we finalise the risk management framework, which is due at Risk and Audit Committee in October, those risks that are outside of tolerance will likely have an accompanied high-level exception report that will provide more assurance to the board on mitigating activity around those. And then secondly, we were asked to review the regulatory domain as the risk appetite wasn't quite consistent with our other levels of appetite within our risk framework. So section 2.9 in the report just highlights a brief summary of that review. So whilst a cautious approach provided stability, our kind of current landscape probably requires a more proactive and flexible stance to meet future challenges and opportunities. So it's recommended in the paper that we adopt an open level of appetite, as this then balances with the other domains and will better allow for innovation, efficiency and improve patient care. So the ask of the board today is to, if there's any questions that they have to discuss, note, but basically approve the risks they are at the moment within the board assurance framework. Approve the addition of risk 8, the social mobility risk, and then improve the recommendation on the regulatory risk domain for an open risk appetite. So if I leave that there and kind of open up to any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. So assuming everybody's read the papers, I'll go to John first.
Leanne, thank you. And thank you for all the work that this is a real team effort, isn't it, in developing this piece. I just wanted to give 2 bits of update because we received this at the Risk and Audit Committee. We were comfortable to support moving the regulatory risk from minimal to open. This definition about what is the regulatory position, we spent some time on what that really is. And so we were comfortable to recommend to the board, it's a board decision to adopt that risk appetite. But it did come along within the recommendation that there's a need for high degrees of risk and control and assurance in operating in an open space. So there was an action for the team to document and to look at that, but we were comfortable with the principle of moving. It was great to see as well the addition of a new dimension within the within the BAF, and we supported that as well. So I just thought that colour might be useful.
Thank you. That is useful, John. So are there any more questions or comments? So can I firstly then ask whether or not the board is happy to approve the new risk, which is the social mobility one, which is included in there? Yep. Okay. And then the risk appetite statement. Yes? Okay, you've got 2 yeses, Leanne.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Okay, so that moves us on to the Chief Exec report. And is David going to cover this? You know. Okay. So Patricia, over to you.
So I'll take the report as read as usual, colleagues. Just 2 or 3 things I just want to pull out of it. First of all, the extended vaccination programme. Sorry, forgot my microphone. I'll take the report as read. A couple of things I want to pull out of it. The extended vaccination programme for the respiratory condition RSV, which I think is going to be really important moving through winter, particularly around reducing the number of people that come into hospital every year with this infection, which is on the increase. 2, industrial and collective action by our GPs, which we have no indication that that's going to be stepped up. We've been doing a lot of work with the GP Alliance in Dorset to understand what the likely response from them is going to be. Some great survey intelligence conducted by them. What we obviously want is the negotiation to proceed, and we reach a position that we avoids any collective action going forward. So we wait and see what the response will be from government. There was a really positive letter to GPs from the Secretary of State a couple of weeks ago, so we'll see now if that is followed up with further meetings to resolve that issue. I think we all know that GPs provide 90% of the activity in the NHS, and so if we see collective action that leads to restricted working hours or withdrawal of service, that would be incredibly serious for the partnership and for patient safety. Finally, you'll see that in the list of corporate priorities, there are some operational challenges. From an operational performance perspective, there are a couple of areas that we need to improve on, but in general, as a system, we're doing quite well. What I'm still concerned about is our financial position. We have been able to ensure that we met our financial plan within the agreed limits with NHS England up to the end of August for month 5. I am concerned about the step up in back-ended savings programmes that takes us into the second half of the year, and I'm sure that Rob will cover more of that off in part 2 when we go through the finances in more detail. But I'm still concerned about that because we absolutely need to hit our deficit target for this year, because it's the step into the medium-term financial plan to achieve a recurrent break-even position within an agreed time frame with the regulator. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Patricia. Rhiannon.
I can't remember do it. I just wanted to pick up on the element around the vaccine programme, Patricia. Obviously agree with you, very, very important. And I just wanted to seek some assurance that primary care is fully prepared, because of course there's an additional vaccine that they have to absorb and where a lot of work goes into that. So just really seeking assurance that the system is ready, I suppose, for this, the additionality, because it's really key, isn't it, as you said.
I'll let Dean pick up on that because Dean leads on vaccination.
Microphone.
Thank you. Yeah, we've done some kind of communications with general practice, and kind of we think that it's going, and Forbes I think has just put his hand up as well, who's probably through the GP Alliance got some more through that, but we've done a lot of communication through it. We've included it with our communication with the COVID and flu vaccinations that have been going on, and my team have been liaising with the GP Alliance.
So I was going to bring Gillian next and then Forbes, but I'll go Forbes then Gillian, if that's okay. Forbes.
Okay, good morning. Thanks, Jenny. I hope you can hear me.
We can.
So yeah, with regard to vaccination, yeah, we are planning currently. There's planning for flu, there's planning for COVID, and now there's planning for RSV. And the national guidance and all these things is never that helpful in terms of timing. You know, we are planning 6 months ahead for a flu campaign. You then get guidance for the next iteration or cohorts of COVID quite late in the day, and then you've got to make sure that supply chain adds up, and then you've got the logistics of getting a large number of patients, many of whom are quite vulnerable and elderly, to certain sites, and the timing of the vaccine. So it is all in hand, and the RSV planning is very active at this point in time. I think, though, the point to make is it's yet something else that primary care is being asked to deliver. And primary care, you know, we're very happy to deliver these things. You know, it's the best place to do it. We're the most cost-effective place to do it, and the evidence is that we deliver it the best of anybody. So therefore, we do have skills and knowledge, but we do need support to do it. And this is really what's led to the collective action. So if I move to that. And remember, collective action is not about us going on strike. So it is different to the action that's been taken in other parts of the health system and with other predominantly medical, but obviously we had nursing colleagues previous to that as well. So it's not a strike, but it is about somehow trying to really make a statement about we can't just continue in this way. It is not sustainable. And we've been making these statements for quite a considerable time, but quite frankly, people believe that their voice is just not being heard. And if we do not say or do something now, then nothing will ever change. And that, I'm afraid, that is the feeling within general practice. And while there are many, many fine words, both nationally and even within our Dorset system, what we need to see is some action. And tangible action. You know, we've just spent the first part of the meeting talking about inequalities, great stuff. So therefore, we need to see a strategic delivery plan nationally and within the ICB that's actually going to make this happen, because it's all about care outside of the acute setting, and of course improves the long-term outcomes for our population. But while we still have that significant differential spend of acute versus community services, and the relative percentage spend is less than it ever was, it's very difficult to make that happen. And so people feel really frustrated. And so we have within the Alliance surveyed the practices. We felt it was important to get a collective view, and we have shared that with Patricia and colleagues within the ICB, and we're just finalising our proposals around that, and we'll share them during September. Yes, there has been some positive messaging from the Secretary of State, but quite frankly, it's not enough. And I don't mean it's just about money. It's not just about money, but money is one element of it. We need to see a greater understanding of the challenges, and therefore a broader and longer term delivery plan that's going to help sustain the out of hospital community, and particularly the general practice community. People feel under, you know, just so much pressure, quite honestly. So we will be looking at capping activity in both for some urgent care and also for some planned care. And as I say, the detail of that is just being finalised and will be shared. And we hope there can be some stronger national guidance. We don't want to be in this position, but we do feel that we need to make a stand, quite honestly, so that our voice is heard. And there is a true shift in direction in terms of strategic decision making at all levels. I could expand much more, but I think let's leave it to that.
No, that's fine. And notwithstanding the really difficult financial situation that we have at the moment, that Patricia outlined earlier, I wonder if we could get into some discussions in part 2 later around Forbes' request around that shifting on finance and just understand what that means.
Forbes knows that's part of the medium-term financial plan. That shift will start in April 25.
I'm suggesting we do it later.
It'll be picked up in
Let's
that.
Let's do it later.
It'll be picked up in that.
So I've got Gillian next, and then Debbie.
Thanks, Jenny, and really helpful to hear both from Patricia and Forbes about the situation in terms of GP industrial action. A plea and a question. The plea is for, at the appropriate point, can we work together to get communications out to ward councillors so that they will understand any impacts that may be happening in their areas. I liked Cecilia's analogy earlier that that ward councillors are the sort of primary care of the wider determinants of health. They're certainly the front line of hearing any concerns that people have locally about services. So if we can just work together on that as appropriate, as I say. My other question was about integrated neighbourhood teams and the ambitions we have there. We know how absolutely front and central the GP Alliance is and our GPs are to that ambition. We hope, I think, that that's some of the way through some of these challenges, but I appreciate at the moment for people it must feel like an additional piece of work, and I just wanted to ask the question of whether that has any impact for us that we need to be aware of as a board. Thank you.
Who wants to respond to that?
Well, I've got a comment, but I would just invite Forbes if you want to say anything to say it before me.
So, Gillian, just your specific is about will collective action affect rollout of integrated neighbourhood teams?
Yes, that's the question.
Potentially, there's not a direct relationship. Of course, there's huge benefits of developing integrated teams and going further faster, because without any additional cost, there's just benefits of collaboration, aren't there, across different sectors. And you know, Matthew and I are very keen to make that happen, and any support that anyone can give, then so much the better. And that's got to happen at a local level. If we just let's focus on our patients, organisational differences don't mean anything and shouldn't mean anything to our patients. It should be a joined up health and local authority care offer that's looking at the outcomes for those individuals, for their families and for their populations. So our GP community is very enthusiastic about integrated neighbourhood teams. As I've said often, it's not a solution in itself, but it will certainly help, we believe, the care that we can deliver in the community. But I don't want to say it will have no impact, because there are certain elements of collective action that potentially will have an impact on our colleague provider organisations, because part of the challenges that we have are what we call the interface issues, where things are being transferred to primary care that we feel could be managed within other sectors. And if we start to challenge some of those, which historically we haven't done very much, then therefore they will then have to have plans to deal with those, or ideally there'll be a conversation with the Integrated Care Board as to how we can perhaps look at resource to better support the right place for the right care.
Matthew, do you want to add anything?
Great, thanks. Completely endorse everything Forbes has said, and I guess what I would say is, look, it doesn't help, but it's an added challenge, but it's one that we've got to work our way through. And what we've got here in our system is a really exciting, ambitious programme of change that I think we've all marshalled behind and we're shaping together. I think we're beginning to see the signs of some real progress. It's early days, but we're taking tangible steps. It's not just discussion. Primary care has got to be at the heart of that. And what we've got to do to succeed is to build up trust and confidence in each other. And we do that by doing the real work. In terms of some of the things at ICB level that can help, there's already a great culture of support and focus, but those things we've just been speaking about today in terms of thinking about the financial shift with the medium-term financial plan, and actually how we as a board put attention on this programme and see it, I think will also help build that confidence and trust.
Yeah, thank you, really helpful. Debbie.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick question for me, and it's for Dean actually. It's just with the RSV vaccination rollout. Just wanted to make sure that we're fully engaging with maternity services. It's not just about primary care. Women already have very routine midwifery care from 28 weeks onwards, which is when the vaccine's available, and probably would be best placed to actually be delivering vaccination at routine checks if they were supported to do so and given the right sort of training and so on. So just wanted to make sure that we'd thought about that and we're not just putting it all on primary care, and we're actually thinking about midwifery services.
And I can confirm that we have done that. We've done that. We've built on the links that we'd got through COVID and the flu programme. And in the last year, we had some real successes with the maternity service because it was an area that we struggled to get to it in previous times.
Right, so I don't see any more hands, so I think that brings us to the end of Q&A around the Chief Executive's report. I just wanted, though, to thank everybody that contributed, because all partners contributed this month to the report, including Healthwatch. So thank you very much, Louise and your team, for doing that. I think there's a real richness in actually seeing what's going on across the system and seeing that in one place. So thank you. And then that takes us to a break. We're 3 minutes early, so if we can make sure we resume at 11:45, please. And we'll go on mute whilst we're on a break for anybody on the screen. Thank you. So we're going to move on to the integrated performance part of the agenda. I think Patricia explained earlier that we've kind of changed slightly how we are taking the board papers forward, so to make sure that we can be a bit more strategic around some of these areas. This is one area where we've done that now. So rather than just having the IPR report and Dean taking us through, that has been there in the papers for you to look at. But what we're trying to do is actually really lift the issues through the various committees as they consider them. So we will go through the committee escalation reports. I'll ask the chairs to introduce those and take us through. And then as we go through the meeting, we hope then to be able to bring out any of the kind of core performance matters as we move forward. So I'm going to start by asking Cecilia to take us through the Integrated Care Partnership Escalation Report.
Thanks, Jenny. The issues that we're dealing with remain the same, but I would say that the housing discussion that we had, the paper that we received from which was led by the local authority partners, was very well received and has resulted in a further housing roundtable, which was held yesterday. And we have now really focused in on the strands of work that you see there, and have people, of individuals, resources from across the system have put forward, have volunteered their resources to support that work. So I think that's actually starting to get some pace behind it. We had a very energetic meeting yesterday, which was really, I thought, was the most positive we'd had, because we're actually now getting into a work stream feeling on those sorts of things. So that was useful. We had the public health, we had Sam present to us the areas that we had agreed that we would focus on, the non-medical determinants related to the cardiovascular disease, respiratory and falls. And again, how we connect that into place, and the integrated neighbourhood teams were discussed there. So that's very much part of what we were just talking about earlier on, making sure that when health and the integrated neighbourhood teams do their work, that all of the other system partners are there and supporting on the other aspects that are available, are necessary. Social mobility, we've talked about that a few times, and we can now see that new focus through the assurance framework. Really pleased to see that. The importance of the economy and the educational opportunities, aspirations, the sorts of things I think that Nick mentioned earlier on as well, health and wealth being completely linked together. I think what we have found, and I think David's report will show later, that there are lots of things already going on. We have a very advanced careers team. We have a great skills board that's looking at a lot of the skills issues. We have work around the economy. So it is, and housing being a fundamental part to social mobility as well. So again, it's the interconnectedness of all of these things which is actually coming through, and hopefully that the additional work that we can see going on for the social mobility will help us perhaps with the conference that we're planning later. The skills improvement plan was useful, I think, for all partners to see what's currently going on and how we might be able to shape that further. Especially to reduce, as it says, their barriers to employment for those. We have a lot of people in our place who are of working age who are not working. How to help mobilise those individuals will help with social mobility, will help with reducing isolation, but trying to understand the reasons for that is something, is a piece of work that needs to be undertaken. And obviously, again, we did receive a paper about the integrated neighbourhood teams, and obviously again issues around about the scale of the change that's required and how people can get behind it. I think everybody's keen to work out how they get behind it, and if we can actually make it something that people can understand and can build organically, I think that there's a lot of potential for the support of the integrated neighbourhood teams from the local communities as well. So I think the partnership seems to be developing well. We're really creating a good, strong system working, I think, across the place. People are starting to understand a little better how they can put their piece in. And I think that for me has been the change in the last 12, 18 months, is that we're really now seeing how it all interconnects.
And as you say, the agenda is aligned, isn't it? Because we looked at housing to start with. We've got obviously covered off the social mobility. The cardiovascular disease is going to come up later on, isn't it, under the clinical plan and implementation. So, yes, thank you very much. Any questions or comments for Cecilia? Welcome, Siobhan, by the way.
She's made it.
No, okay, let's move on then. So we're going to go to the People Engagement and Culture Committee. So I'll hand over to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Chair. We've changed our agenda. I think that's the first thing to say, that we're formatting it slightly differently. So instead of formatting it through definitions of governance, in other words, items for decision, items for noting, we're kind of changing it so that we're doing items that are about people, items that are about culture, and items that are about engagement. And the reason we're doing that is to hold ourselves to a discipline, to make sure that we are actually discussing what we're supposed to discuss, and secondly, that we've got the right balance, because sometimes when you've got financial imperatives, the most costly one, the most obviously linked to finance, so people, can often take over the agenda, when actually culture is just as important, and so is engagement. So there's a bit of holding ourselves accountable in the change there. So you'll notice that that agenda does look a little bit different from the others. We'll see how it works. Don't know yet, but it did okay this time around. We talked about the risks. So at the last committee meeting, we sent a risk back, and we wanted to pull it apart a little bit and make it a little bit more detailed. It was about workforce, and that was done. And so we approved that risk. There were actually 4 new risks recommended to the corporate risk register, and you can see those. You'll see those in the paperwork for today. We also talked about the integrated system performance report. Thanks, Dean. We struggled with that last time. Definitely a step in the right direction this time, much more user-friendly for us. So thank you for working on that. And we also looked at the long-term workforce plan and adult social care workforce strategy. This was interesting because coming straight off a conversation with the risks, we could really start to see how those risks would play out in these workforce plans, particularly around workforce supply and placement capacity. So it was really, it was good to have that on the agenda after the risk, because the risk got brought to life and put into context, and the mitigations became even more critical, obviously even more critical. We also had an item from Kirsty on listening and how to listen better, and I'd given Kirsty a challenge to say, don't come and tell me how well we're doing at listening. Let's get some external partners into the committee meeting so that we've got that validation from someone who isn't from the NHS. So Keith, I don't know if you're still here, but we had a really great presentation from Kate Jupp from Bournemouth Uni, who was just really engaging, and a lot of assurance in that item as a result of her presence. So thank you to Katie. So a lot of positive stuff there, but the one thing, it's not escalated formally, but you will see this report today, is the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Assurance Report. And what I can say is that I don't think, Dawn, you disagree when I said it didn't really assure. We are not heading in the right direction. There are some really big issues there to discuss around inclusion and around people's experiences working for us, particularly around race and some around disability too. So whilst representation is going up, experience is going down in terms of quality, and that's not a good combination. So I'm sure we'll talk about that in more detail, but that was one of the big headlines for me. We really need to be working harder. And I guess just to finish that off, I think around the table, it's time for us all as individuals to think about how we are, each one of us are walking the talk on that. Yes, for example, the NEMs have all got objectives in their work plans, but really, what are we doing personally with our own behaviours and with our own approach to how we take on our roles and how we collaborate? How are we really walking the talk on this? Because I think there's some room to go there, and that's for each one of us around the table to reflect on, I think, as partners and NEMs.
Thank you, Lisa. Any questions or comments for Lisa? Okay, so let's move on to the Prevention, Equity and Outcomes Committee. And in the absence of Kay, and whilst Rhiannon's putting on her mic, Rhiannon, you're going to take us through this, aren't you?
Thanks, Chair. At least I remembered to put it on that. Yes, this is on behalf of Kay, who chairs that. So we started with the committee, or far up the agenda, the committee effectiveness review, and I think this is consistent across all of the committees. Probably a little bit disappointing in terms of the level of feedback in really taking meaning from that, I think, with the exception of one of the committees which John can reference. That said, the comments in that were, you know, so far so good, but obviously a lot more to do. So we talked in quite a great amount of detail actually around the Better Care Fund and the opportunities that may be there. There didn't seem to be anything in the framework that necessarily prevented the ICB and partners from considering that being used in a different way and being used in a much more preventative way, more upstream. So I think that was something that was going to be taken away and explored further. The other thing that we received was a presentation on the Green Plan, but it was very focused on the ICB itself. And I think there was really a question left. How can we make more of the sums of our parts as a system in that sort of green agenda, the green plans, what's working well in some areas, what can be lifted, and also more accountability that might be able to be drawn to individuals in terms of individual carbon footprint. So again, gave the team some additional questions around that to go away and research what is possible in that space. We received the escalation reports from Primary Care Strategic Oversight Group, noting the contract updates and updates from meetings with the chair and the local medical committees. We did receive obviously the corporate risk register, and we considered the elements of the risk register which were pertinent to the committee, in particular general practice sustainability, which obviously we've heard quite a bit from Forbes earlier. So it's right that this risk is being talked about. Community pharmacy and dental services. We also considered, in particular, the new risk on the board assurance framework around social mobility, which was very welcomed. I think there was some discussion about perhaps where most of the oversight in terms of when we apportion better the strategic risks of the board assurance framework to the committees in terms of allocation. But there was definitely seen to be a role for this committee in considering that that particular risk around social mobility together with the strategic objectives committee. So no issues for referral to other committees were identified and no escalation specifically. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments for Rhiannon? Okay, so that moves us on to Productivity and Performance Committee. Dan isn't here today, but Dean, are you able to take us through? Thank you.
So a number of the papers we looked at the personal health and approved kind of three risks that have been subject to the risk register.
Thanks, John. I didn't notice.
Thank you, John. Right, I'll go back to the beginning. So at the meeting, we considered a number of papers on the Personal Health Commissioning agenda and added three of the risks that was recommended onto the risk register for that. Other things that were talked about was particularly the terms of reference and the review of the committee and how that work will be taken forward as in the remainder of the financial year, and re-looking at the membership of the group as well. I'll come back to the finance position in just a moment. On the operational performance side of it, I particularly raised the issue of 65 weeks, which we are due to achieve in our operating plan 0 by the end of September. We're currently not predicting that at the moment. Our latest estimate from our providers is that we are showing about 409 at the end of September. Now that is coming down every week. At the beginning of August, it was looking like 1,000 patients would be over 65 weeks, and that's come down every week since then. So I'm expecting that number to come down. I don't think we'll be at 0 by the end of August, but we won't have any 78-week waiters. So we kind of at the end of August, Dorset County Hospital got to 0 for kind of 78-week waiters. Dorset University Hospitals Dorset already being there, which means that we've only got one patient who's in the independent sector at the end of August that was a 78-week waiter. And just to note, because I know I can't resist it, on operational performance on 78 weeks on 4-hour performance, we have had 2 weeks during August where we have met the 78% standard, which is the standard that is due to be hit by the end of the year. I know we're in the middle of summer, but summer does challenge us in Dorset with the number of visitors that we get. So that's a particularly congratulations to Dorset County, who are exceeding their target, and to University Hospital Dorset, which are on target for August. So that's a great position to be in from that and to build during the winter. And on the finance report, and I'll kind of invite Rob if he wants to say anything in just a moment, we discussed the month 3 finance report. And the trajectory, particularly that we were looking to get back onto plan, having been slightly off plan by the end of month 3. Rob, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, so I was on annual leave at that meeting as well, so I'm not 100% sure how the discussion had in that meeting. However, we did talk about the fact that Dorset's coming under more scrutiny around the level of risk it has in its plan. To identify that, there were 9 systems that have been put into the intervention regime nationally, and there's another 11 that are being looked at, and Dorset was one of those 11. That led to some meetings with the national team, and as part of those meetings, we were recommitting to our plan of a £20 million deficit and monthly trajectories to bring ourselves back online on track on that. And the note suggests that was talked and gone through in the meeting.
Okay, thank you both. Any questions or comments to Dean and or Rob? Matthew.
Great, thank you. So I was also there at the committee because I sit on it on behalf of the board. So I think I've got two comments really to add to the report, and these are about areas of risk that were identified by the committee that I think don't quite come through clearly in the report. So I raised them for completeness, not to open up the discussion about the areas of risk, which I'm sure we'll come to later. And they were really about PHC, where there was, I think, recognition of the great work going on about PHC and lots of signs of green shoots and of starting to change the position within Dorset. But from a financial point of view, a recognition that there was a risk there which could be around £30 million associated with PHC. And hence the work that was requested there in terms of the range of forecasts, and recognising that at a below board level that probably needs to be done more quickly than before the next P&P committee. And the second issue of risk that was recognised was around the £24 million that is sitting in our collective system plan around aspects of transformation, and that we haven't got currently an agreed approach to transact and deliver all of that. Lots of work going on under the banner of that, but that at the moment that is an area of risk for us as a system. So I just wanted to raise those 2 points.
That's really helpful, Matthew, because I was actually going to ask about the first one, because it says that progress to date was noted, but a range of forecasts to the end of the year. And I wondered if that meant that the committee didn't have confidence or hadn't got assurance around the fact that we would land where we needed to. So that's really helpful.
And I think, if I may say so, just for clarity, again, without really opening the conversation, my takeaway from the meeting was that a very good work programme going on that would deliver so much, but it wouldn't deliver the extent, the saving and the plans. So therefore, in answer to your question, I think the committee's view was that we haven't got assurance at this point in time.
Thank you very much. Okay, any more questions or comments on that one? Can I also just reiterate to make sure that we do get it in the minutes, the 78%? Really good. That I think that is really good news. And you know, well, exactly. No, but but actually, Dorset in the summer. I don't know if it was impacted by weather, so that could be. But Dorset in the summer is a challenge. So to be able to do that during the summer, I think is really good. And we would ask that you keep going. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's move on to the next one, which is the Quality, Experience and Safety Committee. So, Rhiannon.
I wasn't on a roll then, was I? So we approved the recommendation that for the learning disabilities mortality review process, adopting a more collaborative utilisation, if you like, of the patient safety framework. It seemed like a no-brainer to us, seemed to make absolute sense. We took assurance that there would be no negative impact on regulatory requirements in doing that, and we were assured that it wouldn't. We approved the annual safeguarding report, and we were pleased to hear that the lead for safeguarding had listened well and had incorporated some of the things that we'd asked for the previous year. We've asked this year for the focus to be on getting more in terms of service user feedback. So we had staff feedback that was reflected in this year's report, which is great. But we'd like to see some service user feedback and a bit more data going forward. Again, the committee effectiveness review was, I suppose, disappointing in that there was only 2 feedback comments. So it's difficult to draw conclusions on effectiveness if only 2 people have offered feedback. So very much an ask, really, of I think it was the engagement team to go away and think about how we might be able to improve our approach to committee effectiveness reviews going forward. We took assurance in terms of one of the questions, I guess, is how do we know that we're getting the right information to take assurance around quality, safety and experience? And it was helpful for Debbie to be able to explain to committee members that the System Quality Group, unlike perhaps some of the other committees, really has that system approach and is really able to get to the nub of things and get that assurance, and the things then are brought through to committee to amplify where perhaps there's been some deep dives. So obviously that's helpful to hear, and obviously we had some areas that we looked at in more focused in that context. And they were brought through the integrated performance report, and again, yes, work in progress, but we're pleased to see how the direction of travel the integrated performance reporting process is taking, and it was easier to look at the quality elements in that context. We received the safeguarding policy, which was essentially a rewrite to enable its readability. It had been approved by the executive group, but we received it. We also received the annual report for children in care and care experienced by young people 23-24, noting the areas for development for 24-25. I think one of the things we're keen to understand was the data around children placed out of county. We understood the children profile within county, but we were keen to understand if there was children placed out of county, so we would have that in future reporting. We received an update on the implementation plan for the clinical networks, and I think progress is being made, which is good to see. I think it would be good to take further assurance when a chair is identified for all of the networks. I think in particular the frailty network was one where keen to make progress, but I think we've got some updates on that in the board meeting. So I won't steal your thunder there, Alison. And we took reports from the recent Dorset Mortality Surveillance System Quality Group and Place Quality meetings. There were no significant issues to escalate to the board, and we reviewed all of the corporate risks and board assurance framework with a lens looking at it from a quality and safety perspective. So thank you.
Thank you, Rhiannon. Debbie?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Rhiannon. There was just a couple of things that I just wanted to make sure the board were aware of that actually weren't captured in the escalation report, if that's okay. The first one was a good news story in the fact that in Dorset we have successfully appointed a new designated doctor for safeguarding children. Dr. Will Verling has agreed and been appointed to take over from Dr. Wendy Dorigo, who's actually retiring. And that's quite an achievement because there's quite a lot of systems across the country that don't have a designated doctor for safeguarding children at the moment. So I'm really pleased that we managed to find a solution, and a really good solution to that for Dorset and for our protection of our children going forwards with that expertise. So I just wanted to make sure that that was noted. And then the other area that was discussed was and also discussed at the system quality group was the impact of the right care, right person implementation and changing service offer by the police. Everyone will know we've had a report on that previously. We know it's a national initiative. We knew we would have an impact, and I think it's fair to say that we have had an impact. Our providers, colleagues are reporting an impact. I just wanted to give assurance that we have a weekly task and finish group that is monitoring that impact and making sure that we are risk mitigating as far as we possibly can and actually sharing the learning. But in addition to that, my ICB quality team are actually capturing any incidents and themes for the system so that we can actually make sure that if there are any gaps in commissioning, that inevitably there will be some gaps in commissioning that we'll need to actually consider with withdrawal of that support service by the police. We can actually do them in an effective and timely way. So we're capturing that. So we are assured that we're capturing it, and we're assured that there's a really good weekly meeting making sure that any issues are being discussed in a timely way. But I just thought it was important that the board knew that that was having an impact but being monitored. Thank you.
Sorry, Jenny, can I just say one thing? We did obviously thank also Debbie for all her leadership and contribution to the Quality, Safety and Experience Committee, which was a really important oversight not included in the escalation report. So yeah, big thank you to Debbie for all of that.
Thank you very much.
Last meeting for those that are not aware.
And are there any questions or comments for either Rhiannon or Debbie?
So well done on the appointment of the safeguarding consultant. Will Berlin's a very, very good paediatrician. Well done.
Good. Can I just ask one question, which talks about the annual safeguarding report is going to be published. Is it now published? Yeah, great. Thank you. All right, so let's move on to the strategic objectives committee. Apologies. Kay isn't here, but Lisa, I think you're going to cover that for her.
I will do. What Kay would say, I think, if she was here, is this is a new committee, so it's still finding its way. And because of that, we did have a discussion in this committee on the committee effectiveness review, because somehow the numbers doubled and 4 people, not 2, as in you and I don't know what we're doing wrong, but 4 people sent feedback. So there was a little bit more to go on, and it was useful because it's a new committee to take that feedback on board. And one of the big issues that we discussed that we probably still have to resolve, but it was useful. It was a useful discussion. Was how do we get assurance on progress towards long-term targets, and particularly prevention targets? So we did talk about logic modelling and how we can do that. So we're still working on that, but it is something that it's an ongoing discussion. We talked about the first operational review of the Wessex Health Partners annual plan, because that plan was approved this time last year in June 2023. And so a year later, we were looking at that plan and progress against it. 15 partners signed up. There's some really good progress being made there. So broadly speaking, we did receive assurance that that plan was on track. We also talked about the Health Innovation Wessex Q1 report. This was brilliant, I have to say. And I was sat next to Paul and I kept poking him, prodding, going, how do we get this to the board? Because for me, it was probably the first time that I'd seen a report that gave consistently quite impressive examples of innovation impact on the ground, and things that we were doing that you could call innovation that weren't nebulous, that actually were cut straight through and were making a difference. So things around healthy weight events, the Dorset Women's Health Hub, point of care testing for frailty, there was a lot of stuff in there that was really, really helpful. So out of 38 work streams, there were only 4 that were not on track, and there were pretty good reasons why they weren't, and there were mitigations in place where there could be, and some of those were being discontinued because they weren't adding value. So broadly, that discussion for me was a standout discussion at that committee meeting, and it was really, really helpful and really positive. And then we had the respiratory pathfinder deep dive as well, which also was incredibly informative and gave good assurance. I'll leave it there, but they were the headlines.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments for Lisa? Moving on then to last but by no means least, John, for the Risk and Audit Committee escalation report.
And it really does work for us to bring risk and audit at the end of the cycle, because what we do is we try to gather together all of the discussions in prior committees, but we also look to bring that together. So we met on the 22nd of August. One decision made by the committee, which was to approve the Emergency Preparedness, Resilience and Response, known as EPRR, update, and that was around business continuity plans. So important in these times. I think we've seen that exercised actually here. So it's important to continue to look at that, to iterate it, to take learnings and to set it for the year ahead. So we made that decision and approved the EPRR plan. You'll see we received a number of matters and key issues at the session. 7 responses for the Risk and Audit Committee Effectiveness Review. We are a very broad group. Of course, we have members from the ICB, but we have external audit, internal audit, counter fraud. We are a big group, and we did note and thought about the aspect. It was a low set of feedback items for all of the committees, and I think there is something to take back about how do we learn and understand and really take stock. So that wasn't just a risk and audit committee matter, but I think it's for all of us. We didn't get the level of feedback that we need to be a high performing, high assurance, high delivery organisation for Dorset, so we felt that. We did receive an update on the consequences of the current financial environment. We will cover that in part 2 today. We also thought about the context of our teams who are working in a plan. When things are going great, it feels a particular way. When things are tough, it can also feel hard for our teams as well. So we did ask the People Committee as well to take a look and to think about how do we support our staff when they're working super hard in the context of our system. And there is always a lot going on at NHS Dorset, but we wanted the team to look at that. We received some standard papers on award of contracts without competition, our DSP, which is our Data Security and Protection report for Q1. Internal audit is really important for us. It's important to hear from management, but it's also important to get that external voice. And there were some important papers that came through the internal audit update. The first was around an assessment of our HR processes. Good to receive that report. Again, we've referred that over to the People Committee to have a look at that report, and we'll hear more in October. We also received an update where internal audit have been doing some work on our system operating model governance. Now, that report has been received in all of the provider audit committees, and it's now at the stage where it's being brought together for final management response. And our view was we should really bring that into a ICS conversation. I'll pick up with Patricia and Jenny about where we do that. Is probably in a board conversation, maybe in a board development session. So we covered that, but pleased with that piece of work to get an independent view about the work that is underway. We covered the risk register and the BAF, and I covered some of those insights earlier on. And I think those are the key items. So I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Debbie?
Thank you. I was also at the Risk and Audit Committee. So just the issues and items referred to other committees, it's just really pleasing to see that. John will know that I challenged the committee, but I challenged all the committees because I felt like although we have that as an area on our escalation reports, we haven't actually got that good yet, I don't think. And I think we've still got some improvement to be made around really utilising that to make our committees really effective. So so I challenged all the committees this time, and John took me up on that challenge, and we've actually referred some things across committee, and I think that you'll get much more assurance and much more insight as a board if we get really good at that. And actually, if we're discussing one thing in one committee, we actually actually share it with the appropriate committee to get that input. So I think it's good to see it on the risk and audit, and hopefully as you go forward you'll see it on more of the committee's reports. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the challenge, because it's certainly made for interesting reader. So thank you, and hopefully the other committees have noted the challenge you put down for them. Cecilia.
But just a question as to how the ICP should play its role in that type of cross passing things to other committees. I'm not sure, but the system operating model governance, should the ICP be doing anything in regard to that? Am I missing something?
I'm just checking. Patricia might want to come in here. That's exactly why we wanted to be able to bring that paper into the environment where we could have a conversation here about some of those findings, the learnings, but also the response from management about that. So with your place in this board, I hope that we'll be able to have that conversation. That was the intention about bringing it into this environment. Do you want to say anything else about that, Patricia?
But not really. I think we need to do a bit of work as a team of chief officers, particularly because we are in the process of changing the exec structure, and so the way that we work needs to be reflected in a new operating model, together with the feedback from that report, and then bring something back to the board for a broader conversation.
Debbie?
Just coming back on your point around the ICP, Cecilia, I mean, the way I see it is that the subcommittees of the board are there with their knowledge and expertise to actually delve into their areas, if you like. So I think for me, the ICP could quite easily refer into the subcommittees if there was a specific issue around patient safety to quality, and if there was a specific issue or challenge being raised at ICP from a people perspective workforce, then I think it would be appropriate to actually refer into the committee for the committee then to decide what to do and how they might want to deep dive. So I don't see any issue with that at all.
I think in reality, once we bring that report here, it will help to think then about what the next steps are. So let's do that. Any more questions or comments for John? I've just got one, John, which was around the committee reviews. I thought you said that the responses were quite low, so we needed to think about that. This report says it was a relatively high response. So
two aspects. I think for the risk and audit committee, we got 7.
Right. Okay.
However,
so
getting 2 in all the other committees, and with us taking a view across all the other committees, I think in totality, I think our view is we have insufficient feedback to be able to make the progress we want to and the learning. So 7 in that committee.
Yeah, but not so much in
but
the
more
others.
to do as a whole, I would say.
So that's something that I think we really need to think about and take forward. So let's have an action on that. Thank you very much for that. That then moves us on to the next item for decision, which is the inward investment strategy. And I think I'm going to go to you, David, to introduce.
Yes, I'm sponsoring it, and Leanne is here for this one as well. So, colleagues, this is
can't see the dog anymore. It's a shame.
I fixed it.
Yeah, the dog or the background. Anyway, this is an important paper. It has been considered elsewhere before coming here, so it has been through a few checks and balances, and is notably supported by the Strategic Objectives Committee. So we're through this paper, we're seeking your support to commit to this way of working, because this is certainly rare, if not unique, amongst the 42 ICSs up and down the country to have a function like this. And in our current financial climate, and not only for NHS partners, but all our other partners, the opportunity and the approach to try and generate investment in different ways of working from other sources rather than traditional statutory sources is a really exciting prospect. And we've had this function in Dorset for a little while, and this is trying to build on that and strengthen it. You'll see there are some strategic and specific commitments from the board that are being sought here, and they're encapsulated in the recommendations. But as you can see, Leanne is poised to take us through some of the key points of this before we get into the discussion on those recommendations. So on that note, Leanne, I'll pass to you.
Thanks, David. So the strategy is being developed by our inward investment team and Catherine Bison, who's our inward investment manager, who's now on maternity leave. So unfortunately, she's not here to present this work, but I just wanted to recognise her efforts in this work over the last 6 months within our team. I'm going to take the paper as read, but do want to take you through a summary of the background and future ambition we are hoping to work towards as a team, as we've set out in our proposed strategy. So the inward strategy has been designed to enhance our existing inward investment service, and you'll see by Appendix 2 that extensive engagement has been carried out in its development. It's primarily split into 3 key areas of development, which will be delivered over a 3-year period. So these key areas are inward investment opportunities, making better investment decisions, and funding distribution. So if we look at the investment opportunities first, we've been successful to date in providing resource and skilled support for funding bid application development to generate income. Over the last few years, we've supported people across Dorset ICS to bring in around 98.5 million. This has mostly been in the grant funding space, where we bid for funding from NHSE and from outside the NHS as well. We've had the opportunity to work with social finance at Macmillan, who are interested in investing in Dorset through utilising national funding for end-of-life care and the creation of an inward investment fund for Dorset. So the investment fund would use a mechanism of social investment to invest in system stresses or priorities that will deliver outcomes or benefits, which we can then reinvest both within projects and programmes in Dorset and then back to the investor. The benefits to the investor is that they get more return for their pound invested, and for us it means that we can invest in pump priming projects. We only have to pay back funding to the investor if we are successful, so the risk sits with them should the project not deliver as expected. We also only have to pay back as much as they have invested. So for an example, if we invested 100k in oral health and it delivered £1 million in benefit, we only have to pay back the 100k, and the remaining 900k gain would be for the system to reinvest. So Macmillan are looking to invest approximately 3 to 5 million over 3 years into a Dorset Social Investment Fund, which is a pump prime funding really for the delivery of transformation projects with a payback mechanism through those delivery of benefits. The second part to that, there is also a national social investment funding for end-of-life care up to the value of 10 million, alongside some capacity support from Macmillan to progress and bid for this funding. So that kind of just in a nutshell explains the social investment element. Then Crowdfunder, as most of you will know, is an online platform which gives projects the ability to crowdfund or fundraise with the access to matched funding from industry sector. So Crowdfunder is a conduit for funds that industry and philanthropists use to disseminate to projects which align with their priorities. So this has changed the model for some dissemination of corporate social responsibility funds, where the industry sector and corporations such as Vitality are actually reducing their teams that would usually disseminate funding and run funding calls independently. So there's an example of a positive experience by one of Dorset's community providers, Pramalife. They set up a project on Crowdfunder. They accessed funding from Vitality, BA, Avios, as well as some other individual donors. To avoid the potential reputational risk of people perhaps seeing NHS as asking the public for additional funding above what their tax already pays for, we are suggesting that we support charities and the VCS sector to establish community-led projects onto the Crowdfunder platform to utilise industry and individual donor funding and support with this work and training around bid funding application development. So it's more about supporting that sector to lead in that space. And then strategic and local partnership development is about introducing a policy for working with partners both at corporate strategic level and at local place-based level to provide capacity support, in-kind mutual benefit, resources for project delivery aligned to priorities, to provide market leading expertise, advice and capacity support in that development of an idea or to support a clinical area. So this model's worked particularly well within the digital sector, where industry is at the forefront of digital technologies and processes, and their learning and skill can be applied to further the capabilities of the NHS and broader ICS. So then moving on to making better investment decisions. This includes continuation of resource and skilled support for project initiation documents, business case development, which are all aligned to our gateway process. With the introduction of business case training to complement our PM Light training already available for project managers across the system, it's the national requirement for business case submission for regional and national approval that those submitting or those involved in the development of business cases are qualified to practitioner level with building better cases training, and then to ensure resilience within organisations, we're looking at training some additional people to that foundation practitioner level to support the system in those bids. We also want to explore a health economics function to support projects and programmes, calculate and articulate return on investment. Health economists are rarer than hen's teeth and they're very costly. So we want to explore how can we integrate health economics within our decision making by developing the workforce and skills in this area. There is interested parties already undertaking some of the work in this area, from Bournemouth University, Health Innovation Wessex, AECC University College, alongside the digital and financial teams here in the ICB. So we would look to work with them to explore how we can collaborate for mutual gain. And then we would also like to explore the alignment with research and innovation for the development of new ideas and other funding streams to realise that additional benefit. There are also future opportunities to explore how the Inward Investment Team can support idea and proposal development linked with research and innovation and the organisations that currently look after these areas. So lastly then, funding distribution. This is another way of enhancing investment into the community by distributing funding from the NHS ICB. There are programmes of work such as mental health who are already doing this, and there is appetite for this type of distribution for health inequalities and other commissioning funding. There are several models for delivering this distribution, either delivering something in-house through a national or local distributor or through a community chest approach. So all of these things need to be explored further and to look into more detail and then bring them back for future agreement if this strategy is endorsed. So the ask of the board today is to endorse the strategy with the recommendations set out in 2.5 to 2.11 to enable us to start taking this strategy forward. But I would just like to put a caveat in there. 2.8 is not required. So if we can take out 2.8 from that recommendation, because we already have budget for that. So I'm going to open the floor to questions. I appreciate I've taken quite a complex piece of work and given you a very high level summary of it.
That's fine, Leanne. I've assumed that people have read the papers anyway, so so your summary is supporting what was in there. I'm going to go to Patricia first.
Thanks, Leanne, for updating or presenting the work that Catherine had done. It's a really good paper, as in the start of a process, but I think it is the start of a process, and I'm not convinced at this moment that we're able to sign off the use of Macmillan funding for anything in the ICB as yet. And the reason why I say that is because this is a really complex area. The NHS really clearly should not accept any external funding from charities for anything that's classed as business as usual. And I think the end of life work is business as usual, whether we are planning to hand it back or not. Once that service gets up and running, there are very clear legal frameworks around that. So my first point is I think we need to be really clear that we're on firm ground. I'm also not that comfortable with us making that decision without having the policy that protects the organisation, that is really clear on the legal position around how we work with partners through social funding. I think there's a broader question for us around how we attract social funding, what routes we do that through, and how we then prioritise through a robust, comprehensive governance process what we prioritise for it to be used on. And the fact that this is just an opportunistic approach by Macmillan, again, makes me a bit concerned that we're not doing it through a proper process. When we talked about this at our senior leadership team, I did raise a reputational issue around crowdfunding. And if we're going to be doing that on behalf of our VCSE partners, then we need to be clear what's the emblem that's going out there, because again, if we are seen to be, as an NHS body, crowdfunding for core service that we should be funding through the NHS, we're going to end up with a reputational issue with our community and the public, which we definitely don't want and don't need. Really supportive of the business case development. Again, I think we need to think across broader than the ICB with our partners and how we might support a whole range of staff around critical mass to be able to write good business cases. When we think about the health economics piece, again, I think it's wider than the ICB. We need to start to think through, as we move forward into the health inequalities, social value, mobility space, how are we going to make sure that the work that we're doing, that we can describe with evidence the full health economics impact, because I think that's something that the NHS in general is not great at doing. And we need to think through who are the people, as we do with our chief exec colleagues and others, who are the people in our system that need to have that skill set, so that that becomes business as usual in the way that we manage our finances. Because there will be things that we do in the NHS that may not have a significant impact on reducing cost in the NHS, but they will have a significant reduction in cost to the whole of our economy. And we need to understand where those connections are and where the flow on impacts are. So I think it's a broader conversation than just the ICB.
So, Patricia, can I just be clear? Are you saying that you think it's too early to sign the strategy off?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. I've got Matthew, then Rhiannon.
Thank you. So I think I would agree with what Patricia has just said. And when I read this paper, I've got two things in my head. So one is a feeling of great positivity. So love the energy, the range of ideas in the paper. And I think we've got to be looking for innovative ways of doing things. But my other set of thoughts really are saying, actually, do we know what we're getting ourselves into? So I think what Patricia said about making sure we've got a robust governance structure where we're prioritising, understanding what the long-term implications of decisions are really important. That we can't do this in an opportunistic way without understanding what the strategic fit is. And I don't think that the paper, as it currently is, really does that in terms of outlining what we are setting out to achieve strategically and how we're going to focus this effort. So just very brief example, if what we were saying is critical to our strategy over the next 5 years is a vibrant VCSE sector, we can help the development of that VCSE sector by focusing in this area in this way, A, B, and C, and here's how we'll have oversight of it, then I would be very supportive of that.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to Rhiannon and then John.
Thank you. Thanks, Leanne. So I want to say the principle of this is great, and it's to Matthew's point, the energy, and obviously you bring in leadership to that space, Leanne, is obviously all really positive. But I'm really glad that Patricia identified some of the risks that need to be properly thought through in terms of how do you prioritise, how do you identify the alignment strategically with tackling inequalities and prevention, upstream investment attraction in the right way, and seeing some of that money that could be generated going into community development, not in perhaps saving bottom line stuff for NHS core business. So I'd agree with all those points. I think there was just one other bit for me then that it was additional. When I was looking at the feedback bit, I think there may be a piece that needs to be done in terms of engaging with the sectors, plural, in terms of what their needs are. because actually that growing the capability in this space is really important, isn't it? It's that adage, isn't it? You know, give a man a fish once, give a man a fish, or a woman a fish twice, on the third occasion teach them to fish. So I think that for me the stats didn't stack up that strongly, because actually, you know, what did you find helpful? Actually the 10%, 9%. So for me, I think there's something about an engagement piece in terms of what are the support needs for the sectors, plural, that you and the team can help to support. Thanks.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, I think the general kind of impetus behind this is fantastic, and the idea that we're having these sort of conversations in common is really huge. However, I just again a little bit of a note on the unintended consequences side of this. In a recent set of bids that went forward, there were 2 competitive bids from Dorset for 2 different elements in this kind of collaborative space. And I think there's a question about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. And also in the context of very limited financial environment, including the sort of CSR investment, the question about how much this again biases or drifts towards control or influence of health priorities over other priorities is also some concern in there. I really welcome the general principles, and I think the involvement of Dorset Community Foundation in a lot of these discussions is really fantastic. So yes, but with a couple of caveats.
Okay, on that. Okay, Zoe.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I totally endorse what's been said before, and I think we can't be seen as an area just to sort of okay, well, there's this opportunity, let's go for it, and it's like we're really desperate. I mean, we are, but we don't need to, you know. But it's how we do it and how we take it piece by piece. And I think, you know, the Macmillan thing is interesting because Macmillan do fund stuff externally here anyway, but it's, and the crowdfunding, again, that concerns me because also the organisations that are looking at this and being involved, especially on the philanthropy side, and I've done a lot of work on this piece over my career, and it is also what they want out of it as well and what publicity they want out of it. Some do, some don't, but it's getting, like you said earlier, it's you know, repeating some things that are already said, but it's actually saying, right, okay, why are you doing this as well? And it's actually going back to them, because otherwise we could be dragged into something that the publicity, exactly what Patricia said, that's not what we need.
Okay, so Rob, then David.
So this is an area that I'm likely to get more involved in future, and I'm liking the conversation because what I'm hearing is that the principle of what we're trying to do feels the right thing. We kind of need to maybe like do reframing. So this is to support a strategy. So like your voluntary sector, do we want a vibrant voluntary sector? Therefore, how can we support that? And this might be one of the legs to support that, and it might be a leg to support other things as well, not necessarily just talk about the voluntary sector. So some of the conversations are a bit more about like how might that work, and how do we stop the unintended consequences? That's fine. That's not necessarily a strategy, is it? We just need to make sure that we don't trip ourselves up on that, because we're trying to set the intent. I think everyone was behind the intent of what we're trying to do here. We just probably need to reframe it slightly as it's to support certain things.
So I think I've picked up the same as you, that the intent, people support that, but it's the how and the what we're going to do, and the strategy isn't quite landing as people would want. So David, as the sponsor in the absence of Neil, do you want to?
Yeah, I feel I ought to stress that I'm the sponsor of this, but not the expert. It's, this is because Neil couldn't make it today. I said I would introduce it, and I felt the kind of inkling to try and defend it a little bit. Actually, and I was trying then to say, well, I'm sat here as the person who's interested in this as well, so I have a question. But no, I'm not going to go with the question. I'm going to try and sum up. I think what we're trying to get across here is that we are positioning ourselves as the facilitator of the system that can make this stuff happen. So we wouldn't be front and center of the crowdfunding. We would be working with the third sector to try and help them skill up so that they can make the bids. What we're trying to do, to Rob's point, is align that work in taking the lead in that space, try and align some of those bids to the priorities we've got as a system. And they don't necessarily need to be health priorities, they just need to be community well-being type priorities. What I'm taking from this, and that's what prompted the question in my mind, is that's not coming through. So I guess there's a bit of work to do there. And what I would like to encourage and test in the room, I think it's there. You know, this is a supported direction of travel. We just want the more work, and I'd kind of encourage us to keep in that innovative space, because this is unusual. There's not many others we can look to see how they've done it, particularly from the NHS ICB side of things. So this is a real opportunity for us to sort of get ahead and start bringing some of these benefits to our community, but recognising the issues that people have put forward here that we need to continue to work on. So if we're supportive, we can do the work.
So I think perhaps there's a fundamental question about whether or not we are the right people to be the facilitator.
Yep.
So so anyway, Leanne and team, if you, I don't think it's going to be approved today. So if you take back the comments that you've heard, and perhaps go back to that basics, because maybe what we can do is provide support to someone else or another body to facilitate, if we're not the right people to do that.
I think you're right. And given that the BCSC Assembly have appointed someone now, we need to think more about how do we support the skill development for them to be able to do it. And everybody is supportive of the direction of travel, but the policy needs writing, and we need more work doing around the governance framework that wraps around it, so we're all clear on that. We can support the direction of travel, yeah, but it needs to come back with some of that more of that flush on it.
Yeah. Zoe?
Yeah, I mean, I am totally behind the the thoughts and the visions and the strategic goals and aims of this. But I say I am concerned about timing, and I think, like Patricia says, and obviously we'll discuss that all later. But with the position of the VCSA, the Assembly now, and the job role's gone out for a permanent PD, and we've now got new chair, and which we'll bring out later, but they're ready to do this, and this is the sort of work that the Assembly should be doing to support the rest of the community and all the VCSA organisations who can help. And this is really, and what support and help they need at a level right the way from top to bottom and bottom to up. So yeah. I fully support that, and I think it's definitely something of what the Assembly was set up to do.
Is that okay, Leanne? I recognise that Catherine and Neil have obviously put quite a lot of work into this, but if you could take the sentiments back, and I think it is progressing it with the VCSC sector to see who's best placed to do that, and then what support we can add towards that.
No, absolutely. Thanks, Jenny. That was a really useful discussion, and I've captured all those key points. So we'll go away and nudge it into the right direction.
Thanks so much, Leanne.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Take care. Bye. So that then takes us on to the clinical plan implementation plan. And Alison, I think you're going to take us through that.
Yes, thank you, Jenny. And I'll take the paper as read in the interest of time, because I recognise we're perhaps running a little bit late, but not wanting to avoid any questions that the board may have. So I think this is a relatively high level paper, but I don't make apologies for that, because actually we're now at the process where we're getting into the detail of a lot of this, but it's not quite at a stage to bring to board yet, but will be at a stage to share in the very near future. I think the high level messages are that we have cardiovascular respiratory, which were pre-existing networks, but not really providing the full remit of what we need them to do in order to work as a system network, either because of where we had good coverage, so to speak, and where we didn't,
or where we had a focus perhaps more on primary care than the secondary care issues that we have within some of our clinical pathways. And so as a result of that, I'm going to be sort of stepping in as a neutral chair just to try and get all of the networks into the right place, because we're asking them to do something quite different, which is around operational performance and quite hard targets around that, which is what are being developed, but actually also looking at that sort of model hospital GIRFT efficiency piece, and as well as helping to advise and lead on and help us and support us with the transformation agenda. And I think that there is a recognition that, you know, the message is that we don't have new money in the system to put to these things, so therefore we need this real hardcore clinical engagement so that we can actually use the money which we spend, some of which is very large numbers, more effectively. And I think that message is being heard. So it's really tweaking of cardiovascular and respiratory. Falls and frailty is proving a little bit more complicated because that's a sort of standing up from a starting point. And actually what we've realised as we've been scoping that is that there are a huge number of really good projects that are all going on and which are focusing on part of the system or part of the pathway. And the last thing we want to do is to put in something which feels like we are interfering or butting in where people are doing fantastic pieces of work, but actually trying to really focus much more on pulling those together so we can really identify where there are still gaps and where we need to consider different options. We've got a project manager who's identified at the moment who's covering respiratory and frailty, and that is really helping us to move on with developing those things like the hard objectives. And we are hoping that the cardiovascular and diabetes, which is I'm counting as a subset of cardiovascular because there's some big chunky things coming down the path for that. We're hoping that will be included when Anita gets her final post in place, where we will be asking that individual to cover as a project manager for both of those networks. So I'll stop there and take any questions, but hopefully that is a quick and dirty summary of where we've got to.
Thank you. Well, it's here for noting. So any questions or comments, Dawn, and then Matthew.
Thanks, Alison. You touched on the fact that the networks are key to the transformation agenda. I'm wondering about your thoughts on the network's readiness to inform our medium-term financial plan. I'm particularly interested in the readiness to inform the workforce models of which we need them to be more efficient. We know that 70% of our costs are in workforce. I'm not feeling fully assured of the readiness of the networks to inform the models that we will need to show our bridge through our medium-term financial plan.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important point, Dawn, and I certainly wouldn't disagree with it. I think we're in that transition period where we are taking, particularly for cardiovascular and respiratory, where we are taking networks that have pre-existed and putting them into a different space. I think that is going to be really important. I think part of the gap that we've identified, and Rob, this is maybe something we need to sort of catch up about, is that actually the financial input and I think the workforce input are going to be a really key part to how those networks deliver what we need them to do. But as I said, it's a very different headspace, I think, where lots of the clinical networks have been quite an organic thing in the past. You know, they've often been driven by a group of clinicians, often sharing education and governance. We're asking them to do something different, and I think, as you'll remember me batting on about before, that's why actually having dedicated program managers is so important, because they will be the people who really have got that operational
head on in terms of helping to drive that forward. But I think that has to be a key part. You're right. We're asking them to be financially accountable. Financially accountable in that they have got a very strong voice in how we spend the money that we're spending on any particular condition, and that has to be around workforce. And you know, things like diabetes, there's a huge drug cost attached with that, which is a slightly different issue, but just as important.
So I've got Matthew, Debbie, then Patricia, and if I take the three and then
thanks. So I guess my comment or question really leads on from that, and in terms of almost how we're supporting that headspace, because it seems to me we're making really good steps here. But so I'm a big fan of Atul Gawande, who's written a lot about how you systematically apply knowledge in healthcare to effect change. And I think what would Atul Gawande would say, looking at this, is you need some kind of checklist that is a facilitative framework to support these conversations, that includes systematically going through things that are important to our strategy, like what are you doing about inequalities? How are they showing up in this area? How are you supporting those channel shifts out of hospital to out of hospital, prevention, technology, you know, as well as GIRFT, and looking at outcomes. And I think it would really help us as a board if we could get a sense in the future of how the networks are being guided, so that we can understand what the expectations are, and then therefore what we will see the programme deliver as time goes on, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Debbie?
Yeah, thank you. I think mine just builds on from Dawn and Matthew, really. I think sort of totally support what Dawn said around the readiness to deliver. And I think as a board, we need to challenge ourselves and the networks to actually go that bit further quicker. And I think I sort of and I recognise that's challenging and difficult, but we need to have those difficult conversations, don't you, with our clinicians. And I think you know, it is somewhat, I guess, concerning that that we've got 24-25 priorities being agreed now, when you almost should be starting to think about your 25-26 priorities if you've got any hope of actually achieving them next year. So I think if you're only agreeing priorities in August, and I appreciate that's what you're trying to push them to do, but if you're only agreeing priorities in August, then we're not going to deliver much of those priorities this year, are we? So I think it's the absolutely right direction of travel. It's great that we've actually got our leads in place now. It's great that we've got the networks thinking, but I think we need to provide more project support, like you've said, and actually sort of really get a programme that's outlined as with real measurable tangible targets and deliverables. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia.
Thanks, Jenny. Good paper, Alison. Really glad that we've got to where we are, because I know that's taken a lot of hard work. And I only read the papers last night, having come back from holiday, so I would have obviously given you these comments beforehand. I think there is something about not just letting the networks develop their deliverables, but also being clear about population health outcomes, location of service, that kind of thing. In here, all of the services we've got listed here, for me, lend themselves to a community-based model within reach into hospital, and we need to start having that conversation about where we expect things to be delivered. I think taking on board also Matthew's point around being clear about how they're addressing health inequalities. Also, these are really good examples of where we could engage that health economics approach, so we know what the impact is across Dorset, particularly around getting people back to work, lower care costs, that kind of stuff. There's something around cardiology, which the things that Martin's focusing on are great, but I'd also want them to be focusing on cardiology intervention rates, because I think in Dorset they're still too high, and where should we be looking at more conservative treatments rather than intervening and sticking a device in or whatever. So if we can think about some of those things and then bring it back for a review where we've got some really smart objectives, then we've got something to build on for 25-26, and we can then start to shape the workforce models around that. Would be great.
Can I come back in now? I couldn't remember if there was anybody else.
No, there isn't. But if you keep it brief, because I think it's here for noting.
Very brief. The headline is that.
Siobhan, apologies. There is
Sorry.
Sorry,
Hi, I might sound a bit funny. I've got a stitch in my lip. I mean, the paper is good, and to see the progress. Alison, my question is: have you got engagement and representation across all the providers? Number one, and then number two, I do think there's a bit of work to do with the provider collaborative and this around how we really drive this in the most efficient and effective way, because there's a lot of ask for lots of programme management across Dorset, and I think we need to challenge ourselves about really using our resources as effectively and efficiently as we can. But the first one is, have we got representation across all the providers?
I mean, I think it's fair to say, to take that one first, Siobhan, that I think it's proving more challenge with UHD at the moment, and I think that is just a reflection of how much the clinical teams are dealing with at the moment. But it does worry me, because I think we are in danger of making decisions which actually clinicians have not signed up to. But we're working on that, and we're doing a lot of soft stuff. And respiratory was proving particularly difficult, but actually in the last week we've now got a name for that network, which is fantastic, because that was one of my big concerns.
And Alison, we can help with that. So if you just reach out to us, okay? Thank you.
Yeah. I've had the chat with Peter, Siobhan, so he's involved in the process, which is great. I mean, I think, just to keep it very brief, what I would say is everything that people have raised are all things that we're working on. So what I'm really pleased about is that nobody has raised something that I've gone, oh, really haven't thought about that. They're all things that we've thought about. I haven't necessarily spelled some of them out in the paper, but the cardiac catheterization rate, absolutely. That's why I'm going in as a neutral chair, because that network is too focused on the primary community care. It's done great things. We've talked about health inequalities this morning. The uptake of BP at home in Portland is the best in the county. So we've got some things which are actually really positive that have come out from that, but we're not looking at the whole pathway, which is what we're putting in as a challenge. But absolutely,
I think, Alison, there's something about the conversation we had earlier about unintended consequences and the response from government on the new hospitals programme, business cases, and us looking as well around our existing models and making sure that we're not disadvantaging communities because of the way we've chosen to centralise because of cost and workforce.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think we're looking to produce dashboards which are picking up quite a lot of the things that are being said, and including the health economics, include lost days at work and or length of sickness absence, those sorts of things. So definitely all of those are on the agenda, but not quite there to present yet.
Thank you. So I'm going to move us on. Last meeting, when we went through the integrated performance report, one of the areas that we focused on was the no criteria to reside. And Gillian, you took an action that, well, in fact, you volunteered. We didn't ask you. You volunteered to go away and see what you were doing in BCP and to come back to us on that. So really pleased that we've got this on the agenda here today. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jenny, and I'll kick us off just as Betty might want to make her way to the table as well, so she can join us.
Hi,
Betty's our Director of Adult Social Care, and
wherever you find us,
a really key part of this team. And Mark from UHD, you will see, has also joined us on screen. So yeah, we agreed to bring no criteria to reside with a focus on the BCP area, the East, and with a particular focus on care packages. 3 points of introduction before I'll hand over to Dean and to Mark and Betty. And they'll give some detail about the progress we're making, but also the ongoing challenges, because we're not where we need to be yet. We're in a recovery process, and we know that, and that's the context for all of this. So point one, these recovery plans are absolutely a priority for us in BCP Council. I've said that before. It's not warm words. Through the council's financial challenges, we've not just protected our social work staff resources, we have moved resources into our hospital discharge work as part of this recovery process, and we've created a dedicated head of service role reporting into Betty, and that's someone who will take up post in the near future. We know there's been some reduction in some of the system funding in this area. We know the reasons for that. That's well understood. And we are seeing progress around that, including in the numbers which caused some concern last time about those waiting over 50 days for discharge. Point two, of course, there is more to do. There is a lot more to do. That includes the fact that we've still got a way to go as a system, getting it to one version of the truth in some of our data. It's a work in progress. And so the deep dive slides that Betty will talk to kind of go under the surface of some of that and try to show what it means when someone's waiting for a care package or in the course of a care package, the issues we still need to tackle, and some really targeted work that we're doing to address those different aspects of it. So there is some complexity to it. And then that's the final point. We're driving performance in a really complex system here. It's overly complex and complicated. We know that, and it's coming out very clearly from the diagnostic work that we've been doing over the summer with the system partner Newton. And we've got some really important decisions coming up actually about how we take that work forward. And so that's kind of the wider context too. So it is going to be a bit of a three-hander because of the teamwork that goes on this. So I'm handing over to Mark first of all, and then Dean and Betty. Mark.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Mark Mould, I'm the Chief Operating Officer at University Hospital Dorset. And I think we've got, are we looking at the slides, are we?
Yeah, the slides.
Yeah, sorry. I thought I was just sort of, the part of the presentation, I'm part of the team that actually a part of the team that obviously is looking to resolve the non-criteria challenge. The focus of the presentation today is on non-criteria to reside, and those patients do occupy 20% of the beds at University Hospital Dorset. But I wanted to say at the start that actually the other 80% of patients in beds at UHD, we are doing a number of things, discharging patients earlier in the day, reducing long length of stays, focusing on the 7, 14 and 21, and looking at the opportunities around GIRF and model hospital. Just some context in terms of non-criteria to reside. We agreed a trajectory of improvement at the start of April, and that trajectory extends all the way to the end of March 2025. So in April we started at 220, and in March our plan is to get to no more than 100. Why is this good? The first thing, is good for patients to receive care in the right location. 2, it enables us to plan really well. We don't want to see 100 escalation beds open at University Hospital Dorset during winter. And 3, it strategically supports the east of the county in moving towards the emergency and planned care split in Q3, Q4, 25-26. Where do we find ourselves at this moment in time? We find ourselves in August at 199 patients with a non-criteria to reside in the acute trust, with a trajectory plan of 60. So we are 39 off trajectory. And I think the presentation we've got today is the bit about how we're going to move to be able to recover that position. I'm going to hand over to Dean, who's going to detail how collectively we're going to address these challenges.
So first thing I wanted to do was kind of bring us back to some of the data, because there's been a huge amount of work in the last year in understanding the data that we have got around this, because as Gillian has already said and Mark alluded to, this is a very complex system that we're working in. There's a lot of moving parts to it. We, as I presented to the board on a number of occasions, we have had a really focused plan around this since the beginning of the year. We were very clear on 5 activities that we were going to do. What I'm going to do in a moment to show kind of the focus that we're now bringing to those to focus those down a bit further. But just in terms of some of the data that we've got. Sorry, has that moved off your screens?
It has, yes.
Thank you. Sorry, don't know how that's left. Just wait for the numbers to come up. Thank you, Jane. So there are some areas that we've had particular successes. So when you see on slide, I think 3, Jane, we're on in the top left corner, the number of people that are delayed by over 21 days has really come down. So those that have been waiting a very long time, we still have got too many because it's not down to 0, but there has been some improvement there. Areas that we're still focusing on are those trying to get people out. We try and get people out within 5 days. I mean, try and get them out on the day, but we have a target really around the 5-day point, and that has deteriorated a bit. Now, some of that deterioration is due to those numbers that you can see there that have come out of the long waiters. So there have been a greater number of the longer waiters to come out of hospital doing, which is really the reason for that decline. The amount that come out in 0 to 5 days has remained consistent. But when we look at the bed flow that we've got, we have got a lot of delays. So across the whole of Dorset, we've got 300 community beds. These are in community hospitals and in reablement and kind of local authority beds. Our average length of stay is about 40 days. This has been validated by Newton as well. We should be around 28 days. So kind of we're 12 days over, nearly 2 weeks longer than what we should be. And most of that is accounted for by a delay moving on. On the kind of right hand side of the graph, sorry, it's a bit small on there, but what this does, it breaks it down by from in UHD, kind of by Poole Hospital and Royal Bournemouth on each of the pathways. So pathway 1 to 3, pathway 1 is going home, pathway 2 is a bedded care, and pathway 3 is the more complex ones. What we're seeing, even those that are due to go home, we are having too many people go over that 5-day point before being able to go home, and there are some that are going out to kind of over 30 days for that. We can go on to the next one, Jane. So in looking at where we've got the data that we've got and the experience that we've got, we're focusing those 5 actions down on 3 things. So the first one is those that can go home, kind of getting more of them to go home. And this is again backed up by the Newton work that we have been doing, in that there are more people that could go home. It's something like 15 people per week could go home rather than into a bedded care, is some of the early findings that's coming from that. So we've got something to go at there. We've had experience of how to target individuals to get them home through the discharge to assess reduction in capacity that we've had. We've taken a very focused approach to individual patients, and they have got on to their next stage. Second part is reducing the delays in community beds. We have now got expected dates of discharges for everybody in all spaces, and working to those dates, and the transfer of care hubs are the mechanism that we use to do that. And we're putting the priority, and kind of BCP are putting their priority for social work into both those community hospital beds and the reablement beds to reduce the time people are in fact are waiting for a Care Act assessment. And the third area of focus is on the services where we have to go and get individual packages for individuals, because we haven't got routinely commissioned services. So these are the ones where for things like delirium, we have not got sufficient services for those. We've now got a pathway for it, and we have got some patients home now on a delirium pathway. So they're the 3 areas that we are really focusing down on. I'll hand over to Becky.
Thank you for inviting me to come along, or for me coming along. Just to give you a bit more context, I'm not going to labour the slides in detail, because I'm sure that you would have had a look at them, but just building on what Mark and Dean has said, we did a bit of a deep dive specifically into BCP. So this is not the wider system or both LAs, this is just specific to BCP, what I'm going to talk about, but it does have
ripples into the whole of the system, as you would expect, as we're part of the system. So what we did was, after the last meeting that you had, Gillian had come back, had a chat with me, thought let's do a deep dive into a week, because we couldn't do a deep dive into, you know, a huge length of period, but a deep dive for a week would give it some indication. So we did that around July time, mid-July time, highlighted some things for improvement, highlighted some discrepancies, and highlighted just some real kind of fundamental detail that maybe some of us weren't decided on. And in particular, just what were some of the blockers that we're all facing and how we can overcome those blockers. So that was the context. So the next slide then just shows the hospital discharge data mapping that's taken place, and I'm sure you've had a chance to look at this already, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. You do have that in your pack, but it just kind of shows how we get from the start to the finish and what are the stuff in between that we need to make sure that we cover and that we do well. So please do look at that slide in your information that you have in front of you. So I'll just take it on to the next one. And this has got this is a bit more labour intense with detail, because it was important to do that, because what this one shows, the week that we did the deep dive internally in adult social care within BCP, at that particular week that we chose, and it could have been any week, this was a week that we just randomly chose, there were 245 people that were deemed to be ready to leave throughout the system, and 47 of those people, if you like, were for BCP, for adult social care within our areas to do some work on. And when we unpicked that detail line by line for each of those 47 people, and we did do that, you know, our teams did do that, it showed us some interesting information and some interesting things that we could do, and other things that we were doing, and maybe building on some of the areas that we could do better. And what that showed was, out of those 47, 25 of those people had already had their Care Act assessment. So there's always more to the detail, and I think we all just need to be really conscious of that. And those 25 people out of the 47, I've listed there, and I'm not going to go through it in detail, but I've listed why they were continuing to still be in that hospital environment, even though none of us wanted them to be. And I've put some of the infrastructures that we've put in place to support those reasons why people weren't able to move out. And you can see the reasons more in bold and what we were doing. So if I randomly pick one of those, the self-funders, we had already met with the self-funders. We'd already spoke. Self-funders are people who fund their own service and provision, and usually don't need an awful lot of support from local authorities. So we knew that there were 2 of them that had already had all of the support, but were still waiting in hospital and could have left hospital. So what we were doing with that was just going back to those people, encouraging them to move. One of the blockers that we find, and it's been picked up with Newton, and it was also picked up with the BCF and PPL offer of support, was this notion around how quickly we're engaging with families, and how quickly we're engaging with loved ones, and how we're encouraging them to come in and work with us in a more timely way. But just on that, I just wanted to point out on that one, we do have a dedicated number of social workers that we fund, who are specifically focused on self-funders and no one else. And they work within our acutes, if I'm particularly talking about UHD here, as well as longer casework and social workers picking up those people too. One of the fundamental things there was housing. And we do need to do better with housing. Everybody does across the country for people that are vulnerable. But usually people that are waiting for housing, it's usually complex pieces of work. It is not just them
needing to go back and have a piece of equipment. It can be a major adaptation. It can be that their circumstances change so much that they now need bespoke housing, and trying to navigate a B option or an alternative short-term option with them and their family. It can take a lot more time, but you can see that we've put a homeless intervention team in who are doing in-reach into the hospital. We've got linked workers with housing, and I'm going to go away and do some further work with our director of housing to see how we can really build that, because we're seeing more and more of this becoming a real issue for our acute hospitals, and it's not right for the individuals. So I'm going to move on to the next slide that just follows on in respect of those 25 who had already had their Care Act assessment and why they were still delayed. And then out of that 47, that left 22 people. And I can guarantee, I looked at those 17 of those 22 were well in the process of having their Care Act assessment done, and or it was already completed. So that was, you know, business as usual. They were well on the way. But out of the overall 47, there were 5 people, and this is what I was more concerned about, as well as the reasons why people hadn't moved who could have left. There were 5 people who were waiting allocation for the Care Act assessment, and I think you need to keep all of this in the context of how I'm explaining it. There wasn't 47 people waiting. There were 5 who hadn't had any intervention or who hadn't had their Care Act assessment completed. And the shortest wait for that was 4 days, which is not good enough. But the longest wait for that was 12 days, which is completely not good enough for those 5 people. And I've just cited some of the reasons why that was. But nevertheless, those reasons are reasons that we should be able to overcome. So we're really focused on that as well. And this would be common for most local authorities. This is not unique to BCP Council. So I'm here for BCP Council, but I know through my system work that and neighbouring authorities within the Southwest, this is common. So next slide. And then that was just some of the discrepancies, and I'm not going to really go into those because we will pick those up, and we are picking those up within our week groups and various other groups. But it just shows that there is still some further work for us to do in just getting that real accurate information and making sure that it is accurate. So I'll just come on to the 50 days because I know that was one thing that was raised. And this is an area where progress has been made, certainly from within adult social care, from where I'm sitting. We are tracking really closely anybody who's waiting 50 days. We want to completely get down to single figures for people waiting that are more complex. But for now, that was what we were focused on as a system, and the numbers have really come down on that, and that's because, you know, within adult care, those that are waiting for us to actually discharge them, and they've come down because of really key focused work, but also for our own internal data systems. We have really created a completely different Power BI internally for us for UHD, for our co-host, which is our next piece of work within the system. So that's shown good progress. But again, nobody should be waiting that long anyway. It's not justifiable. So just talking about some of the next steps. So you can see some of the next steps that we put, and some of this is relevant to the wider system. And Dean and Gillian touched on the Newton work, and we're all very, very much involved in that. But I know that will validate some of what we already know. And then from that, we'll be able to take forward different ways of doing stuff and hopefully see improvement this winter and then so on in the longer term. We have also internally, as I've said, created a much better internal BI, Power BI system for us to really track our patients within UHD that are waiting for our adult social care team to do interventions. What we've also done is done some work with Louise and Healthwatch. We're doing some work with Healthwatch around trying to gain better understanding of what people's general overall experience is. We're doing that, but we're also doing that within the system as well. We have put additional practitioners in to UHD and to our wider health acute and coho hospitals, talking particularly about Alderney
and some of our other co-hosts as well, community hospitals. And what we've also done, as Gillian touched on, is I've recruited a new post, a head of service post, which will focus solely on hospitals. That will be their primary function. They will have one or two other areas within their remit, but that is what they will do to really continue with improvements and to build on those improvements. And I just wanted to just touch on some of the preventative measures that we've put in place and that we're building on within the community, within the CAN, the Community Action Network, and the Wellbeing Collaborative. We've appointed 3 new coordinators who are going to start. What's the date today? I can't even remember the date. The 16th of September, they'll be starting, and they're going to be working across UHD, but also in our cohos and also within reablement and within FIGB and those kind of areas that have direct impact. They're going to do a lot of stuff face to face with patients and families and individuals. So I won't go into that too much more, but also Prama Life, we're using Prama Life to do follow-up calls and to help do that light, softer touch. And as some of you will know, we've got the trusted assessors across our hospitals, and this is Dorset wide, and that's beginning to make a difference. And of course, we've got some beds here and there and some other resources. So they're kind of some of the preventative stuff that we're beginning to build on as well. And then if I can just finish on some of the challenges for us, and I'm going to be really transparent about the challenges. Some of the challenges for us, and will be for our partner LAs, is around the demand increase. We've had a 35% increase in adult social care, new people coming for service provision. So we need to do things differently to be able to help us with managing that further demand, etc. Thank you.
Thanks, Betty. Just before I go to questions, we are way over now. We're due to finish in 10 minutes, and we've still got another couple of papers to go. So, we're going to have to, I think, take an extra 10 to 15 minutes into the break, and then we'll try and recoup time later on. So, got a number of questions. Nick, I think you were first. Who else indicated? Okay, so Nick, if you go first.
Yeah, thank you. I've just got a couple of comments, and then I do have a question. So this paper came in at 8 o'clock last night, and I spent this part of an hour trying to work out what it said. It's got so many unexplained acronyms in there. I use TLA, but you won't know what TLA means. There's a whole load, and as Patricia knows and Matthew knows, my wife is involved in the system, and I had to get her help to actually understand what it said. So I now know all about pathways 0 to 3 and various things, but SPA, I guess it's single point of access, but I've still no idea what an SPA list is. But yeah, it was really impenetrable. And then I sent I pinged off to my exec director to see how we're doing, get his view on it. And I think I'm happy to say Dorset Council only has 4 no criteria to reside residents this morning, waiting for our care. But there was I think it was one of the pages, I can't remember which one, it was the 17th of July snapshot. And there's an item in there which is MDT awaited, which is multidisciplinary team, I guess. I was quite surprised, but it states in there that it was recognised that sometimes relatives need to be involved in the process and they're not available immediately. Is that really a revelation? Isn't this blatantly obvious? And why wasn't that known before? Sorry, it's an observation. And I guess my question is, there's obviously a disparity of performance between Dorset County Hospital, which is doing really well, as far as I can see, and UHD isn't. Maybe Dorset Council and BCP had different performances. I understand there was an urgent emergency care programme. There's something to do with a system-wide project, which is like the hospital journey. How does this fit in, and how's the information being shared between DCH and UHD, for example? Yeah, I guess that's my question.
Okay, I'm going to take Louise's, and then if we come back to those.
Thank you. Yeah, I was also interested in the difference between UHD and Dorset, but it made me think that we just recently published a blog with Janet, who works for Volunteer Centre Dorset, about her work around supporting people with discharge from hospital in Dorset, which is on our website at the moment. That might be of interest, because some of those smaller things that really make a difference to people, like having portable key locks, somebody to feed pets, somebody to provide things at home that would just help people get out. And I think Janet said in the course of a couple of months, she felt that at least 50 people had got out of hospital quicker because of those little interventions they were able to do. So hopefully CAN and Prama, that work with the voluntary sector in BCP will really make a difference. Thanks.
Can I just ask two really quick things? So one is in relation to where you've ended up. So you went from 62 people to 4. So the question would be, how do we sustain that? And I don't know if the things that you've got in train are going to do that. And then there was something on slide 7 where it says there were 5 people still receiving rehabilitation or therapy. Was that in the hospital? So are you saying that they weren't actually waiting to be discharged because they were actually still receiving treatment? Is that what you mean by that 5? Yeah. Patricia.
So thank you for the report, Alice. That was great. And now we've got quite a lot more detail in terms of what's happening and where we're heading. And well done on the reduction to 4. That's brilliant. There are a number of things in my head. First is, how do we get to a point where we've got a single version of the truth between yourselves and UHD? Because we all need to be working on one list. 2, I think from the work that's being done at a place level, we've sort of got some targets built in there around social work assessment time and then out of hospital. Can we get a regular report into either the operational report or the quality report that tells us whether we're hitting that target for both of our places? Then we know. Because I'm sat here thinking it's great we've not got people waiting over 50, but I'm not clear how long they are actually waiting. And I think that's a really important closure of the quality and safety loop around the assurance piece for the board to know that. And then and I think that will give us the information that says whether there's been a targeted approach and we've got down to 4, as opposed to this is going to be a continual improvement programme and we'll continue to see the performance getting better and better.
Dean?
Just back in on the Dorset Council.
Yeah.
Michael.
Oh, thank you.
And if I leave you and Betty also to pick up on anything else that you want to.
Yeah, kind of 2 is not correct. I think what the it'll be a correct subset of the numbers that are in Dorset County Hospital as no criteria to reside. But in terms of the total numbers of people who are in Dorset County Hospital, my latest data, which is the 2nd of September, is there were 60 people in Dorset County Hospital who were no criteria to reside, and that number fluctuates between the high 40s and the 60s on a regular basis. We try to get that down to 38. We have got that number down to 38 in the past, but that's where we need to be.
49 today.
49. Thank you.
Why would Nick be told 2 then? Why would Nick be told 2 if it's 14 and 16?
It's 4 people currently in DC in the system waiting on adults care packages from.
Are you talking about right? But not the no criteria to reside.
What it could be is 4 people waiting to be either allocated or in a Care Act assessment process. That's more likely to be the answer there. Certainly, those people leaving hospital it will always be more than 4. I think even under the best days, we always had more than 4 people waiting to leave hospital for packages.
Betty, did you want to come back on anything? Just mindful of time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just to acknowledge what Louise said around looking at that, we will, Louise, we'll have a look at that, and I'm sure it is being picked up by Prama Life and others, but we'll just cross-reference that and really support what Patricia said about having a regular report. I think that would help us all. And you'd have one clear version rather than different interpretations. Yeah. And I think that's what part of the issue is. Everybody has different interpretations. And I wouldn't want our teams to feel that they're being judged inappropriately or inaccurately, because we all know how hard they work and how much effort and time they put in. So we'd really welcome that. Thank you, Jenny, as well.
Thank you very much. Anything else? You can turn your mic off then. Debbie's really helping you. So, okay, so we are, this has been trailed already a number of times today. We're moving into the, thank you very much, Betty. We're moving into the Integrated Care System EDI report. And Debbie, I'll hand over to you. Dawn, sorry, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks everyone, and welcome to Fran here on the screen. So as has already been trailed, the item that we're going to discuss now, this is the foundation of getting it right for health inequalities across Dorset. When we get inclusion right for our staff, for our workforce, we are able to get it more right for our population. Not only through our workforce experience, but helping our workforce to view the world, see the lens through a lens of pro-equity. So you have the report and you have the data. Fran's here to answer any particular questions that you might have on the data. Where I would like to position our conversation is around the board's role in driving this agenda. So I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to position this. So we have a deep cultural and systemic challenge with equality, diversity and inclusion. So health and care and the experiences of our staff are a microcosm of the world, of the society that we live in. And the recent protests, the civil unrest, have once again surfaced the undercurrent that bubbles constantly close to the surface. And when we look at our data, it would be easy to feel disheartened about that. But that's not good enough, because a core purpose for us as an ICB is to address health inequalities, and that starts with that inclusive, positive experience for all of our staff. So previously, and centrally driven approaches, and by centrally driven approaches, I mean NHS central driven approaches, have to some extent focused on first order change and transactional activity. And this has helped shift the dial on representation, but it hasn't shifted the dial consistently on the experiences that people are having. So in Dorset, we've been working with thought leaders in this area on true transformation and third order change, and it's good to see that our partners across the system are embracing approaches for transformational change and third order change. The Southwest Regional Leading for Inclusion strategy is recognises this, and it's good to see that our approaches across Dorset are aligning with that Southwest regional approach. And finally, we can also see a shift in national thinking from NHS Centre on this as well. So we are getting some traction in changes in thinking. The next steps and recommendations in this paper are going to take time to deliver results. There's no quick fix, and it takes leadership from us all as a board in this. We've got Matthew, who has stepped into the space of our system sponsor for this agenda at Region. We've got Patricia, who chairs the Southwest EDI subgroup, and I guess we all need to be comfortable with talking about this agenda and what is uncomfortable. And so the question for us as a board is, how do we want to lead this agenda, and what's the role that we take? So whilst Fran's here for any detail, I think that's the strategic conversation that might be more useful than the drill down into the data. But Fran's here if we need that. Thanks, John.
Things to what you just said.
Can you? But I just want to pick up what Dawn just said, actually, because I don't want us to delve into the data and into the detail. I do want us to really focus on what our role is in this.
Yeah,
first. Yeah.
for me to delve into the details.
No. I'm just letting everybody else know whilst they're thinking about their questions.
It's look at the end. What Dawn said is absolutely accurate, and there's something for us to consider about what our role is in leading this change across our system, because it is our role as a board. It's not our HR directors' roles.
No.
It's our role as chairs and chief executives and organisational leaders. And there's two issues, isn't there? If there's a moral argument and there's a business argument. Organisations, which is really well proven through their international research, organisations that are more diverse and inclusive outperform organisations that are not by 25%. So the reality is, if we want to be a high performing integrated care system, we need to take this really seriously. That's the business argument. If you want the moral argument, then everyone who walks through our doors, whether they are our members of staff or they're people who are receiving care or support from us, should be 200% confident that when they do so, that their race, their religion, their sexual orientation, whatever their protected characteristic, they're going to feel as valued, as looked after as any of their white counterparts. And the reality is, in our system, that is not the case. So we've got a really important role in this space to do the right thing, not just in developing the cultural approaches that we need and the leadership development approaches that we need, but also to have the policies that back that up. And what this report says to me really clearly is, one, we haven't got the culture right in terms of leadership, but two, we haven't got the accountability right either. Because if we had zero tolerance policies that we were pursuing at the right level, that meant that anybody that comes into our system and abuses our staff gets a zero tolerance approach to care unless it's life or limb, that any of our staff that exhibit these behaviours to colleagues, that we had a zero tolerance policy and we were applying it properly, we wouldn't have these issues. So we've got to be committed to it. We've got to do some development in understanding how we pursue our leadership role, and then we've got to understand what the accountability framework is that we all have to implement across our system to make sure this gets delivered. We know already that around roughly, if we look across our NHS providers, around 25% of our staff are from minority backgrounds. This year alone, the junior doctor intake for the NHS, 50% were from global majority countries. We also know that if even in the next 10 years, the GMC have published a report that says no matter what we do about increasing our training intake in doctors, in the next 10 years, we're still going to be looking at 30% ongoing of our workforce coming from global majority communities. So we've got to start to look after our staff. We've got to start to make them feel valued. We've got to start to give them the opportunities that they deserve. We've got to stop taking judgments about their level of training, their quality of training from overseas, when the reality is most of it is based on British training models that were inherited through the empire. So we've got a lot of work to do in helping our people understand fundamentally what the issues are, but more importantly, once they understand, how they respond and how they lead is absolutely critical. Otherwise, we're not going to make the changes that we need to.
And to add to that, we need to become more diverse as a board, because it's not just about clinical staff, is it? So, Matthew.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm really pleased to be taking a sponsorship role for this work in the system. I strongly believe, and I would feel this is a shared feeling around the table, that this is not sort of peripheral. It's not we do our work and we do this. This is right at the centre of our work. And actually, if you think and reflect on the conversations that we've been having today about inequalities, about how we offer services throughout our population, about how we listen to all voices, that's this agenda. So I think the paper we've got in front of us today it actually has some really difficult messages for us. It's a good paper in terms of the information that we've got. And then as a board, we need to decide what's the so what we're going to do about it. How do we how do we move our feet and move the feet of others in the right direction, and what does that mean as an ICB? And clearly, for those of us representing organisations at organisational level, there will be a lot of work going on in this area. So I wonder whether, and particularly thinking about the timing today and the importance of this, Patricia, you talked about the development time that we've got in October. I wonder whether we could agree to devote a decent and meaningful chunk of that time that we've got in October to this, and continuing that conversation about what is our ambition, what does the role of this board look like, and then the sort of how, in terms of how we're going to get there, so that we're building on this and the recommendations, but we are co-creating the next stage of that approach together, rather than trying to rush the conversation.
There is an issue about rushing it today. We have earmarked to date to do some EDI development for us as a whole board, which I think is November, is it? Or is it December? So we will do that anyway, assuming we can make that date work. But there's nothing to preclude us having some discussions ahead of that in October. So I think we should take that up. I'm conscious that there are 3 other people that want to come in. I'll bring you in, but my suggestion would be, rather than us playing lip service to it today, just because we just haven't got the time, that we perhaps bring this back in October and really think about how we think about our responsibilities and how we're going to take it forward, and that hopefully can then lead into the session that we're going to have in December. But I'll take Rhiannon and John and then Lisa.
I wonder whether we are accessible in terms of encouraging and bringing a diversity in its full beautiful range of different people that bring different things to thinking well together. But I also wanted to also translate that into the ICS space, just thinking about is this the bigger piece about so, for example, access for people who have a disability to open and green spaces. So there's different levels of conversation, and it's not pursuing that now to your point, Jenny, but I think the conversations need to go to the what's the makeup of our ICB and all of the people that we employ in the system, but also what does that mean in a full and complete way for access for everybody. An inclusive approach to the
Yeah, again, it's a question about kind of opening up this to consider the NHS as the anchor institution within this kind of space, and the ideas of kind of having common induction processes and welcoming new staff who are coming from the global majority communities. We aren't really talking about how they experience our native communities, dare I say, that the local communities are not part of that picture yet, to the extent that I think they potentially could be. And I think asking some of those very difficult questions and raising some of those stories through with communities and working with some of the VCS organisations that champion that work, I think would be really valuable. And if we could include that in that following meeting, I think would be really helpful.
Yeah, Lisa.
Something that tries exclusivity or exclusion don't want kind of stopping. And part of that process is think about everything that you see, where we hold our meetings, the language that we use, the acronyms, everything that we do. Think about, does this drive exclusion or does this drive inclusion? And I don't think we're at that point where it's front of mind all the time in everything that we do. So ask that question, and then if the answer is I don't know, then ask the question, and that means that we all our staff and all our colleagues, what have you done this week by inclusion and to stop exclusion. And those questions, they're the kind of questions that you walk along the corridor at work and you stop something in the program. You know, when was the last time you did something? So that it's a perfect mind that we know that every single day and every single thing we do, we have to be thinking about that. Sometimes we get it wrong, sometimes we get it right, but it's got to be mind. And one of the things that strikes me also with the reports that we get to meetings like this is a number of times I see, you know, that impact assessment box, if you could scale this up, equality impact assessment. There are more no's on these reports for the equality impact assessment and there's no impact assessment. Doesn't everything have an impact on equality and inclusion? So why are there so many no's on the reports that come to these meetings? You'd expect to see a bit more proactivity there as well. So I think there are some things we can do, both from a personal and behaviour perspective, keep that stuff front of mind. From a reporting perspective, it shouldn't be no. It should be yes, and this is the impact on equality, on diversity, on inclusion. So I think we need to build in some discipline and be really tough on ourselves with our behaviours and every single.
Okay, before I bring Patricia back in to close, sorry, was somebody on the screen wanted to come in? No? Okay, before I bring Patricia back in to close, just one thing I want to say is somebody's got their mic off and there's background noise. So just one thing I wanted to say is that work in this area is really uncomfortable, and I think part of what we have to agree as a board is that we will stay with being uncomfortable. And I think often what happens with EDI work is that rather than staying in the place of uncomfortableness, particularly when we're talking about something like ethnicity, we want to move to something else where we feel a bit more comfortable. So I want us all to think about what is it that makes us uncomfortable? Why does that make me uncomfortable? And then what do we need to do collectively as a board to move forward? And if we could focus on that for the October discussion, I think it will help us to really think then about what we need to bring back when we are doing the work with Eden Charles. Patricia. So we've got a recommendation to do something October, to do something more detailed in December. Anything else you want to?
If I'm honest, jumping into a conversation in October without having started the work with Eden makes me feel slightly uncomfortable, because I think we're in danger of making some decisions when we don't fully understand the issue. And I think if I went in this room and asked everybody to mark out of 10 how competent they feel to talk about this issue, the numbers would be in the 1s and 2s. So I think in my mind there's something about October which is quite simple, which is Dawn coming back with, we've got a change agents program at the moment. We fund it as an ICB and we only run it once or twice a year with 25 people, and it's not enough across our system. So actually I think the conversation for October could be, this is how much it would cost if we ran 25 people once every few weeks. Can everybody put their hat in the ring with some funding to support that? Because that would get the leadership development training off the ground in critical numbers, which then we'll start to see a shift in the culture. I think whilst I really appreciate your sentiment, Lisa, I think it's really difficult to be an upstander if you don't know what the consequences are. And my brother has just stepped off as the chief executive, Kick It Out, and wrote a really good article actually earlier this year about an incident that he and I were involved in, where even he, as a black man, found it really difficult to be an upstander for me, being assaulted. So I think we need to really think that through, because it's not as easy as we think it is. I think that the reason why we need to focus the conversation on ethnicity is because, one, we avoid it and it's really important, and two, because around our community of global majority, and I really want us, if I can, to say, can we stop talking about minorities and start talking about global majority? Because the reality is we are only a minority in this country. In the world, we are a majority. So can we really stick to that terminology? Because it's quite offensive to be called something different. But also that we, in our black and brown communities, we'll have people who are neurodiverse, we'll have people who are gay, lesbian, LGBTQIA, we'll have people who are all sorts of different protected characteristics. So if we can get it right for those communities, we'll get it right for everyone else. So it comes back to Jenny's point that we can easily talk about disabled because it makes us feel more comfortable. The reality is some of our black and brown communities will be disabled. So we deal with that group. We cover the whole section of intersectionality where we start to get into the reality of how we help people understand those communities better. And so we get into a conversation of creating the foundation of understanding and inclusivity. That means we've got a really strong platform to step off then to do our health and equalities work that we really need to do.
So can we leave you to work with Dawn and perhaps the CPOs or whoever the leads are for the other organisations to think about October? And then obviously there's a longer piece work for December as well, isn't there? And we might need to do some kind of survey stuff beforehand, but we can talk.
Dawn's got that in hand.
Yeah,
I think the only other thing I would say is I don't see this as a one-off development day for the board. This is an ongoing series of development days, and we'll need to commit to that if we really want to get underneath this.
Yeah, Matthew.
So I would also support that. I'm really pleased to hear that we're going to be doing some work with Eden Charles. If people don't know Eden, he's extremely skilled and very inspirational in terms of working with boards in this space. But I do think some time spent in October discussing these issues and at the very least having some more opportunity to share information before the session in December would be helpful.
Yeah. Okay. Right, I'm going to move us on. ICS and the ICB annual assessment. Can we just take it that it's read? Dean, do you want to say anything really quickly? I mean, it's with us here today because it's part of the publication process, and then it will also go on our website after today, won't it?
That was the thing I was going to say. I never remember to turn my microphone on. Was kind of, I've got a whole list of kind of reiterating kind of what is good. So I would really recommend that people go and read through what has been kind of replayed back to us as we have done really well. Yes, there are things that we need to do, and they're really big things that we need to do, but there are a lot of things that we're getting right.
Awesome. Thank you. Any questions or comments then to Dean?
There's Rachel nodding.
Part of bringing it here today is part of that publication process, isn't it? Because it's now in the public domain, but it will go on our website. So that brings us to the close of the things that we needed to do. We don't have any questions from the public unless I've missed anything. So that then brings us to any other business, and we are going to be half an hour behind, but we'll think about part two over lunch and how we schedule that. A few things that I wanted to say for any other business, but before I do that, can I check if anybody else has got any other business? Alison? Nope. On the screen? No. Rhiannon, back? No. Okay. So the ones from me, the first thing to say is that this is John, as in Basics, last meeting in public. John is going to be moving on from us and to do other things. He will still be with us in October, but we won't obviously have a meeting in public. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and to say thank you to John in public. And of course, we'll talk more about when you're actually moving on. A really sad goodbye to Debbie, because this is officially your last meeting, isn't it? And Debbie's been with us since the start of the journey. You've heard she's been quite remarkable in trying to nudge and push us around various aspects, turning on Dean's microphone on and off. So Debbie, you will be missed. It's it's been short for us, but really valuable time that you've spent with us. I'm not sure what's been planned for your official leave and do, so hopefully we'll get some news on that and we'll be able to do something officially. But I thought it was important that we thank you, particularly as you're going on to retire, aren't you? I wish you all the best in retirement, and
with a huge
watch this space. Watch this space. And then the very last thing was just to thank Gillian and BCP for hosting us again today. And I'm really glad. I was kind of anxious this morning that we might experience the same problems with the technology. Not anxious for myself, just anxious for your team, because I know they were really stressed about it, and I thought, oh God, I don't want that to happen again. So I am pleased that the technology has worked, and your team have been able to be a bit more relaxed today than they were for the last time. So thank you very much. That brings the meeting in public to a conclusion. We will break for lunch now. For those on the screen that are going to be rejoining us for part 2, can I suggest that we start at 2:30 and then just, yeah. So we'll resume at 2:30, so we get half an hour lunch, and we'll see you at 2:30 on the closed bit. Thank you.